I didn't understand what true isolation felt like until the night the wilderness stopped sounding like wilderness and started sounding like something trying to speak back to me. And I guess that's the part people don't talk about when they celebrate the freedom of taking an old Volkswagen camper deep into America's forgotten spaces. That the silence out there isn't empty. It listens. It waits. And sometimes it answers. I remember pulling into the campground just before dusk, the last smear of orange sinking behind a ridge of black pines. The place was called Bear Hook Hollow, though I never found a single story of a bear sighting going back 20 years. Locals said the name came from the way old logging equipment used to groan in the wind, metal hooks clashing like something clawing at the trees. Most tourists didn't know that. Most tourists didn't care. I wasn't exactly a tourist. I'd grown up camping all across the Midwest, but this was the first time I'd taken my Volkswagen across state lines with the intention of being alone for days at a time. My therapist called it controlled solitude. My friends called it the world's most dramatic road trip. I called it necessary. I had been carrying tension for months, the kind that settles into your ribcage like gravel. Every day felt like holding my breath, and the only place I ever felt myself release was inside that van. Windows cracked, the smell of pine needles and old upholstery mixing into something oddly comforting. I thought returning to the places that grounded me, the forgotten campgrounds, the fire roads, the old trailheads barely used anymore, would pull me back to myself. But I didn't know what kind of weight I was driving into. When I got to my site, there was only one other camper in the entire loop. A middle-aged guy named Morgan, traveling alone in a small trailer that looked like it had seen too many winters. He waved once when I parked. We exchanged the kind of polite introductions that happen when two strangers meet in a place both of them know is a little too empty for casual conversation. He seemed kind enough, normal enough. The type of guy who'd spent more time repairing engines than talking feelings. I didn't think much of him then. I leveled the van, set up my little folding table, and started cooking a simple dinner. The air temperature dropped faster than I expected. A thin wind snaked between the tree trunks as if it carried a memory of winter. Every now and then a gust would hit the van so sharply the windows trembled. The lights above me flickered, and I caught myself glancing toward the forest line more often than the food I was burning. It wasn't fear exactly, more like attention. Like something in the trees wanted me to notice it. I kept telling myself it was just the adjustment from city noise to near total silence. When you go from sirens and traffic to nothing but wind and branches, your brain starts trying to fill in the blanks. It invents patterns. It warns you even when nothing's wrong. At least that's what I told myself until I heard the knocking. It started as I was cleaning up the dishes. 3 soft taps coming from somewhere behind the van. I froze. The plate slipped from my hands and clattered onto the metal table. At first I thought maybe a branch had fallen, but branches don't knock in rhythm, and they definitely don't knock twice. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I looked toward Morgan's trailer, expecting maybe he'd walked over for something, but his lights were off. The man had gone inside over an hour ago. The campground road was empty. No cars, no rangers, no late-night arrivals. I clicked off my lantern and listened. Nothing. The silence after the knocking felt alive, like whatever had made the sound was still there, holding its breath with me. I finally worked up the nerve to circle the van, moving slow, forcing my steps to stay steady even when my pulse wasn't. The dirt under my boots was cold and soft, as though the ground had recently been disturbed. I scanned the tree line with a small flashlight I kept clipped to my belt. Nothing moved, nothing watched, nothing breathed. When I reached the back of the van, my beam landed on something faint but visible in the dirt. 3 small marks. Not footprints, not claws, more like the end of a stick pressed straight down 3 times in a neat line. Tap, tap, tap. I tried to slow my breathing, but the air around me felt heavier, like the forest was leaning closer. I told myself maybe a kid had left those marks earlier in the day. Maybe. But the campground had been empty when I arrived, and the dirt still held the impression of their shape crisply, as if they'd been made minutes ago. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the sliding door cracked just enough to let air in, but not wide enough for anything else. I turned on a dim interior light, letting it cast a warm, fragile glow across the cabin. Normally, that glow feels like a sanctuary. When you camp in a Volkswagen, the light becomes its own kind of heartbeat, steady, gentle, grounding. But that night, I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see a face watching me. Nothing ever appeared. Yet every few minutes I heard rustling somewhere in the dark outside. Too slow for wind, too soft for an animal, too deliberate for chance. By morning, exhaustion hung over me like a fog. I brewed coffee and walked toward the creek at the far end of the campground, hoping cold water and movement might shake off the feeling of being observed. The trail leading down to it was narrow, lined with moss-covered stones and old rotting logs. The air was crisp, clean, almost sharp. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything. Stress can do strange things. Isolation can do stranger ones. Then I saw the second set of marks. Not 3 this time, 2. Pressed into the soft mud near the creek, positioned as if someone had been standing there, facing the water. The impressions were shallow but unmistakably fresh. The shape was the same as the marks behind my van. Small, circular, like the tip of a cane or a pole. Something about the number 2 bothered me even more than the 3, as if whatever was leaving them was counting down. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, the brush, the path I just walked. Nothing moved, but the forest suddenly felt wrong. Too still, too expectant. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had interrupted something. Or worse, that something had been waiting for me to find these. When I got back to the campground, I finally told myself I should talk to Morgan. Not because I expected him to know anything, but because I needed to hear another human voice, needed someone else to confirm that the world around me hadn't subtly tilted in the night. But when I approached his trailer, I realized he wasn't there. The steps were down. His chair was out. His mug still sat filled with half-finished coffee on the small picnic table. But the door was wide open. And the forest behind the trailer looked like something had moved through it. Branches bent, undergrowth disturbed, mud displaced. At first I thought maybe he'd gone for a hike. Maybe he'd wandered off early. But the deeper I looked into those trees, the more my stomach twisted. Because directly behind the trailer, spaced evenly apart in the fresh mud, were 2 marks. Then 1. Then nothing. A countdown that ended at the tree line. And the forest beyond was silent in a way that made my skin crawl as if it had swallowed something whole. I whispered his name once, and something in the trees whispered mine back. I froze, heart hammering like a drum in a deserted cathedral. The whisper wasn't a voice exactly, not words, not language, but it carried the unmistakable cadence of attention, of recognition. My name, repeated softly, stretched across the dark, tangled branches. My rational mind fought it immediately. It was the wind, my imagination, residual adrenaline from last night's knocks, anything. But even as I tried to convince myself, every nerve ending in my body tightened, alert to something unseen pressing in. I ran back to the van, slammed the door, and locked it. Hands trembling, I shoved the key into the ignition, but the engine barely turned over. Cold, old Volkswagen, faithful in the day, fickle at night. I turned it again, cursed, and finally coaxed it to life. The dashboard light painted the interior in a sickly yellow glow. Every creak, every groan of the engine sounded louder than it should have. It was as if the van itself was alerting me. Don't stay. Leave. Run. I glanced at the road out of the campground, barely visible in the dim morning light. No signs of other cars. No sounds except the occasional drip of dew from the pines and that subtle whisper that seemed to linger in the gaps between branches. My first instinct was to leave immediately, drive until the trees and the thin fog swallowed the campground behind me. But something pulled me back, an uneasy curiosity. Morgan. What had happened to him? And why did the forest feel alive, aware, like it had claimed him? I knew I couldn't just walk away without understanding at least a fragment of it. I grabbed my flashlight, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped out again. The air was sharp against my lungs, bracing me. The ground underfoot had hardened overnight, but in patches, the soft mud from yesterday held the faint impressions of the marks. I followed them cautiously, counting each one as they led deeper into the pines. My mind screamed to turn back, but my body moved forward almost on its own. Curiosity, fear, and some stubborn human need for answers pushed me past reason. The path the marks traced wasn't straight. It twisted, dipped, and climbed uneven ridges, forcing me to navigate over roots slick with moss and around old, fallen logs. The forest swallowed sound. Every step felt exaggerated in the silence. The snap of a twig under my shoe ricocheted like a gunshot. I noticed then that the air smelled different. Earthy, yes, but with a hint of something metallic, something that reminded me of iron and blood. I told myself it was just the creek from earlier, or the minerals in the soil, or my own adrenaline talking. But my stomach knotted tighter with each passing step, and then I heard it again. The whisper. Sharper this time. Closer. Not my name exactly, but a cadence, almost like a voice imitating me, a tremor in the sound that made it clear it was intelligent, deliberate. I spun, shining the flashlight through the dense growth, but saw nothing. Shadows stretched long and unnatural across tree trunks, shapes that my eyes wanted to define as animals or branches, but which refused any clear form. Each time I blinked, the darkness seemed to creep a little closer, to gather itself, as though it were waiting for me to make a mistake. I found Morgan's footprints at a bend in the trail, or at least what I assumed were his. They ended abruptly, mid-step, in the damp forest floor. It was as if he had been lifted or had vanished into the earth itself. My stomach turned. Rational explanations abandoned me. I whispered his name again, this time more forcefully, demanding an answer that I already feared I would never receive. Silence, heavy and oppressive, filled the void. My mind raced. Was it the forest? Some natural phenomenon? Or something else entirely? Something that had been patient, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to remind me how small I was. Panic began to curl in my chest. My breaths came in shallow, rapid bursts. I considered retreating, running blindly back to the van, anywhere away from the twisted quiet that felt like eyes pressing against me from every angle. But then I heard it. A rustle. Not the casual disturbance of wildlife, but deliberate, calculated. Something moved through the trees with a purpose that matched the rhythm of the whispers. I shined my flashlight in that direction, and for a fleeting moment, a shape appeared. Tall, indistinct, shifting in the corner of my vision. It vanished before my eyes could focus on it fully, as if it existed just beyond the boundary of reality. The forest felt almost sentient, bending, stretching, rearranging itself around me. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move forward again, each step a battle between terror and compulsion. The trail opened onto a small clearing I hadn't noticed on the map. At the center lay Morgan's trailer, or what remained of it. Something had shifted it violently from its original position, doors ajar, interior upended, debris scattered like shards of memory. And there, against the far wall, faint but unmistakable, were the marks. 1, 2, 3, 4, counting up to a total I didn't have the courage to memorize. They weren't human footprints. They weren't animal. They were something else, deliberate, designed to be seen, to provoke. My hands shook violently as I raised the flashlight. A cold sweat soaked my shirt. The forest, for the first time, seemed to lean in closer, compressing the air around me. And then I heard Morgan's voice. No, a scream, distant yet impossibly near, echoing through the trees in a way that bent direction and space. It wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation, vibrating through my chest, setting my teeth on edge, rattling my skull. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, nearly dropping the flashlight. The light swung wildly, illuminating jagged trees, fallen logs, and then nothing. Silence again, suffocating, as if the forest had just swallowed the scream whole. I realized then that leaving might not be enough. that running down the same path might just loop me back into the same nightmare. The forest had a memory. It knew me. It remembered every footstep, every thought I had about leaving, about hiding, about staying calm. It wasn't simply a place. It was a presence, an intelligence, an adversary. I turned back toward the van, desperate for any semblance of safety, and noticed something I hadn't before. The marks had followed me, tiny, subtle, pressed into mud and dirt in faint lines leading straight to my wheels. My pulse quickened. I jumped inside, slammed the door, locked it, and pressed both hands against the steering wheel. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my chest like a drumbeat announcing my presence. I fumbled with the keys, started the engine, and drove. Not fast. Fast might provoke it, but steady, careful, conscious of every sound the tires made over gravel and roots. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. But even as I drove away, even as the trees began to thin and the road opened to the morning sunlight, the feeling didn't leave me. It lingered behind my eyes, in the spaces between my ribs, in the quiet whispers of memory. Morgan was gone. The marks were gone. But the forest remained. Watching, waiting, patient. A reminder that isolation is never just empty space, that the wilderness has rules and rhythms beyond human comprehension, and that survival isn't only about skill or caution. It's about respect, intuition, and the courage to confront what you cannot see. By the time I reached the paved road, the sun was high enough to burn off the morning fog. I pulled over, hands trembling, and sat for a long while staring at the horizon, trying to reconcile the reality of the forest with the reality of my mind. I realized something important. Fear, when faced directly, is both a teacher and a guardian. It warns you, shapes you, molds you, and sometimes it leaves you changed in ways you can't immediately name. I kept driving for hours, thinking about Morgan, the marks, the whispers. Every turn in the road, every curve of the hills seemed to replay the forest's rhythm in my mind. I swore I would never return, and yet somewhere deep in me, a part of me knew that the forest's call, its quiet, insistent awareness, would never truly leave. That it had marked me, not just in memory, but in understanding. That to thrive in these isolated wildernesses, I would have to carry both caution and courage, vigilance and respect, fear and fascination, forever intertwined. Because the wilderness is not only a place to survive, it is a place to awaken. I drove until the forest finally loosened its grip, until the pines and shadows gave way to open fields and the distant hum of a highway. The van's tires rattled on pavement instead of roots, and the engine's growl felt familiar again. But the forest's memory lingered, threading through my thoughts like a second pulse, a rhythm I couldn't escape. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the marks, felt the brush of branches that weren't there, and heard the faint cadence of my name whispered by something that didn't breathe. By the time I reached the small town at the edge of the county line, I was drained, hollowed out by fear, yet alive in a way that had nothing to do with comfort. I parked at a diner and sat, hands wrapped around a lukewarm coffee, watching the town go about its ordinary routines. People laughed, cars honked, radios blared, and yet even here, I could feel the forest at my back, a shadow pressed against the edges of my awareness, reminding me that the isolation I had sought wasn't just geographical. It was psychological, spiritual, and deeply internal. The forest had stripped me down to my instincts, forced me to reckon with trust, fear, and the thin line between rationality and survival. It took days for the nausea to fade, for the trembling to ease, but I didn't stop thinking about Morgan. I didn't stop thinking about the marks. And I realized that what I had witnessed wasn't simply an external horror. It was a reflection of my own inner state, my own vulnerabilities laid bare by the relentless silence of the wilderness. The forest wasn't cruel. It wasn't evil. It simply existed with rules I could not negotiate, lessons I had to respect, dangers I had to acknowledge. And the first step toward thriving wasn't escaping. It was learning. I returned home, parked the van in the driveway, and sat on the hood, staring up at the night sky. Stars stretched across the black canvas in endless succession, distant and indifferent. I thought about the campers I'd met, the people who wandered into forests seeking freedom or solitude or answers, and I realized that the wilderness tests you in ways that no road or town ever could. It strips you of illusions, forces you to confront what you fear most, and then rewards you with clarity if you survive. A week later, I went back, but not to Bear Hook Hollow. I chose a different route, a less isolated stretch, somewhere I could practice the lessons I had learned. The van carried me over new ridges, through rivers thick with reflection, along trails where every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves reminded me to move deliberately, to respect the unseen. I kept careful logs of my paths, watched the weather, marked the places that felt alive in a way that demanded attention. I studied the forest as one studies a living being, aware that each shadow could teach or deceive, each sound could warn or mislead. The Volkswagen became more than a vehicle. It became a sanctuary, a classroom, a mirror. Inside its walls, I learned to listen deeply, not just to the sounds of nature, but to my own instincts, the subtle nudges that whisper when something is wrong. Fear became a tool, an ally that sharpened awareness instead of paralyzing action. And the forest, in turn, became a teacher, unforgiving, patient, persistent, revealing truths about patience, humility, and the courage it takes to face the unknown. I kept a journal during those trips, recording the things that frightened me, the moments I thought I would break, and the small victories that reminded me I could endure. The marks in the mud, the whispering trees, the vanishing camper, they never left my memory, but they transformed into symbols, not of terror, but of vigilance. Each encounter reinforced a truth. The wilderness is honest. It does not hide danger. It does not lie. It responds to preparation, respect, and awareness, and it rewards those who approach it not with arrogance, but with intention and care. Eventually, I returned to Bear Hook Hollow, not as a reckless wanderer seeking thrills, but as someone who understood its rhythms, its moods, and the lessons it demanded. The silence no longer felt like a threat. It was a dialogue. I left markers, notes, small reminders of my presence, acknowledging that the forest would remember me as I remembered it. The wind whispered again faintly, but this time it felt like recognition, not menace. A contract of mutual respect had been formed. That's what survival in America's most isolated wildernesses ultimately teaches. It's not about outrunning fear, not about conquering nature, not about vanishing into solitude to test your limits. It's about learning to inhabit the spaces where life feels fragile, where control is an illusion, where awareness becomes both shield and compass. It's about understanding that danger exists, but that dread, when faced with honesty and preparation, can transform into clarity, growth, and empowerment. I think of Morgan often. I never found him. Part of me believes he was claimed by the forest, another part hopes he escaped and found his own way back. What matters is that his disappearance taught me to listen, to respect, and to trust the subtle, relentless signals of the wilderness. I carry that lesson with me every time I roll the Volkswagen's wheels onto a new dirt path, every time I set up camp beneath trees that might be ancient, patient observers. I carry it in the rhythm of my breath, the careful placement of each footstep, the deliberate unfolding of every night spent in the quiet that so many underestimate. And now, when I pull into a secluded campground, when I see the shadows stretching long across the moss and fallen leaves, I feel the weight of awareness settle comfortably over my shoulders. I am not naive. I am not reckless. I am alert. I am present. And I am alive. Because the forest taught me that fear, when approached with courage and respect, is not a wall, but a guide. It is the whisper that tells you to move carefully, the mark in the mud that warns of unseen presence, the echo that reminds you the world is far larger, stranger, and more intricate than your daily life can suggest. Every journey, every campfire, every night in the van reinforces the truth I have come to live by. Thriving in isolation doesn't mean denying fear. It means engaging with it, learning from it, letting it shape your awareness and sharpen your instincts. The wilderness is merciless in its lessons, patient in its testing, and exquisite in its honesty. And those who respect it, those who survive it, emerge not only alive but transformed, carrying a clarity that the ordinary world can rarely provide. The Volkswagen sits in the driveway now, old, dented, imperfect, just like me. But it is ready, as I am ready for the next journey. For the next stretch of unclaimed roads, the next whispering forest, the next night where silence presses against the windows and teaches in ways nothing else ever could. And when I finally roll out, wheels crunching over gravel, engine humming a low, steady rhythm, I remember one final truth. Survival is not just the act of escaping danger. It is the art of listening, respecting, and moving through fear until it becomes something else, something that guides you, shapes you, and reminds you that even in the most isolated wilderness, even when the world feels small and indifferent, you can thrive. Because in the end, the forest does not give up its secrets lightly. And neither should you. The first thing they never tell you about RV parks, the thing that sneaks up on you long before any ghost story or backwoods legend, is that danger doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it just watches, and sometimes it stands a little too still under the glow of a porch light. My name's Elias Hart, I'm 42, and I've spent more than half my life roaming the roads of this country in a beat-up Volkswagen that's older than some of the campground hosts I've met. I've always said the road teaches you things you don't learn sitting still. Things about people, about instincts, about how silence can be a warning, and how a friendly smile can hide something sharp behind it. But it wasn't until the fall of last year that I learned the lesson that changed the way I camp forever. I wasn't dealing with ghosts or creatures or anything supernatural. I was dealing with something worse, something real. I had just rolled into a small RV park outside Cheyenne, Wyoming, not the kind you see on travel brochures. This place was wedged beside an old frontage road, half the rigs abandoned, the rest sitting uneven like they'd been parked in a hurry. The office was a faded trailer with a hand-painted sign that read vacancy, even though the bulbs behind it didn't work anymore. I should have turned around right then, but I'd been driving almost 10 hours in high wind, and fatigue makes you settle for things you'd normally think twice about. So I stayed. I found a narrow pull-through near the back, close enough to the cottonwoods to give me shade, but far enough that branches wouldn't scratch the roof all night. When I stepped out of the van, the air felt wrong, still stale like the park was holding its breath. No kids, no dogs, no chatter, just the sound of a flagpole rope tapping metal in the breeze. And somewhere faintly the squeak of a swing set I couldn't see. I chalked it up to off-season. I told myself that 5 times. The sun dipped low as I set up my little campsite. I keep things simple. Fold-out chair, small leveling pad, and a lantern that's always a little dimmer than I want it to be. As I worked, I noticed an older Class C across the gravel road. Curtains drawn, door closed, but I could feel someone watching from inside. You know that heavy sensation between your shoulder blades, the one that makes you adjust your posture even though no one said anything? That's what I felt. I didn't look directly at the rig. I've learned that staring only invites more. But I kept it in my peripheral vision, and not once did the silhouette inside move. I tried shaking it off, telling myself I was just tired, but that quiet unease settled under my ribs and tightened there. Around dusk, the park manager finally appeared. A man in his late 60s, stringy hair, thin frame, wearing a faded sheriff's jacket that didn't match his story. He introduced himself as Ron, smiling like he had all the time in the world, and talked with that too slow cadence that makes you wonder what's happening behind his eyes. He handed me a paper map, even though the entire park could be seen from where we stood, said checkout was whenever, rules were common sense, and noise curfew was up to you. None of that is normal. Not in a functioning RV park. But when you've been on the road as long as I have, you learn not to challenge strange. Not immediately. I thanked him, he nodded, and then he lingered longer than needed, his gaze drifting past me to my Volkswagen. He asked how long I'd had it, then who did the maintenance, then whether I was traveling alone, not in a conversational way, more like someone checking off boxes in their head. Instincts whispered, lie, but I didn't listen. I told him the truth, told him it was just me. His lips tightened in a way that didn't belong to the rest of his expression, like a crack forming in a frozen pond. He tapped the side of his leg twice, then walked away without another word. Night fell fast, and with it, tension crept across the park in a way I still can't fully describe. It's strange how darkness changes the personality of a place. The empty rigs looked more abandoned. The shadows between them felt thicker. Even the swing set, now visible in the moonlight, rocked like someone was just pushing it. I heated up a small meal inside the van, did a bit of journaling, tried listening to a podcast, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me to let my guard down. I decided to take a quick walk to the bathroom before turning in. As I stepped out, I noticed the lights in the Class C across from me were now off, but the curtain, a single slit-like gap near the top, remained open. An icy prickle slipped down my neck. I walked anyway. The bathroom was a standalone concrete block about 80 yards from my sight, the kind with flickering fluorescent bulbs that buzz like angry insects. As I got closer, that buzzing mixed with something else, something softer, a rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Not fast, not urgent, but deliberate. I slowed down, looked around. The night was empty. The wind had died. Yet the tapping continued, steady and patient, like someone drumming a single finger against wood. I tried laughing at myself, told my nerves to knock it off. I pushed open the bathroom door, and the tapping stopped instantly. Inside, everything was cold, colder than outside. And in the mirror above the sink, I saw something I still can't erase. A gray handprint, smudged, fingers too long, like someone had pressed their hand against the glass with intentional force and then dragged it down. The streak trailed to the bottom edge. I didn't touch it. I didn't breathe for a second. I used the bathroom quickly and left without washing my hands. Not something I ever do, but something in my gut screamed go. I walked fast, trying not to look over my shoulder. Halfway back to my van, the tapping started again, slower this time. Tap. Tap. I turned my head toward the sound. It was coming from the swing set. A figure sat on it, small, hunched, motionless. The swing beneath them hardly moved, yet the chains trembled. I froze. The figure didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me, just sat there, staring toward the line of trees. The moonlight wasn't bright enough to show a face, just the outline of someone sitting perfectly still in the middle of an empty RV park. My breathing grew shallow. My instincts, those instincts I had ignored earlier, now screamed with clarity. You're not alone here, and whatever else is out here isn't harmless. I walked the rest of the way quickly, but without running, unlocked my van quietly, slipped inside, and locked the door. My hands shook as I pulled the curtains closed. The tapping finally stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe I was safe, but then I heard footsteps outside, slow, dragging, circling the van. I didn't dare look. The footsteps circled once, twice, each step heavy enough to press gravel into the dirt, slow enough to feel intentional. I held my breath so tightly my ribs ached. My curtains were thin, and the lantern inside the van cast a faint glow. Whoever was out there knew I was awake, or at least aware. I reached instinctively toward the small drawer near the floor where I kept a utility knife. Not a weapon meant for fighting, just something I used for cutting rope, trimming duct tape, opening packages. But having it in my hand gave me something to grip, something to ground me against the panic swelling in my chest. The footsteps paused near the driver's door. I could almost imagine someone leaning close, listening for movement, listening for fear. The silence stretched, the air thickened. Then, without warning, a knuckle tapped softly against the metal. Not a knock for attention, a test, a slow, almost curious tap, tap, tap. I clenched my jaw to keep my breathing steady. The tapping stopped and the footsteps resumed, circling around the front, past the passenger side, back toward the rear. Gravel shifting, then falling still. Nothing. Just the ringing in my ears and the faint hum of my van's refrigerator. I waited, 5 minutes, maybe 10, before slowly peeling back one corner of the curtain by the rear window. I didn't open it enough for anyone outside to notice movement, just enough to see. The spot behind my van was empty, but the swing set, the figure was gone. Fear slid down my spine like ice water. I forced myself to sit still for another long minute. My heartbeat thudded against my sternum like it wanted to escape. Eventually, I leaned forward, blew out the lantern, and let darkness swallow the interior. My eyes adjusted gradually, and the only light was the dim silver shine of the moon through the curtains. That's when I noticed it. A shadow under my passenger side window, too tall, too still to be a bush. It wasn't moving. It wasn't breathing hard enough for me to see a rise or fall. It just stood there, watching. I sank lower into the bed, barely daring to breathe, knife still tight in my grip. My mind raced. Was it the silhouette from the Class C? The figure on the swing? The park manager, Ron? A drifter? A trespasser? Someone who'd been waiting for a traveler like me to come through this off-season ghost park? I'd heard stories about RV park true crime, break-ins, assaults, people disappearing in poorly monitored campgrounds. I'd always told myself I'd never be one of those stories. But in that moment, pressed into the mattress of my old Volkswagen with fear choking me, I realized I wasn't special. I was just as vulnerable as every other traveler trying to move quietly through the world. Minutes dripped by, slow, spreading, syrup-thick minutes. Eventually, the shadow shifted, just slightly, as if turning its head. I held my breath until spots danced in my vision. A sudden, metallic clang rang out from near the dumpsters at the far end of the park. A lid slamming shut. The shadow snapped its attention toward the noise, its shoulders angling in a way that told me it wasn't startled, more like evaluating. Then, after one more second of stillness, it walked away, smooth, silent, like someone who knew exactly how to move at night without drawing attention. I didn't exhale until I heard the footsteps fade, but fear has a way of staying behind even after the danger leaves. I sat there, listening for any hint of return, for any change in the air, and after a while something else crept into my awareness, whispering. At first I thought it was the wind slipping through the cottonwoods, but wind whispers differently, random, scattered. This whispering came in short, clipped fragments like someone talking low on a phone outside. I pressed my ear near the window, careful not to touch the curtain. The voice was faint, but I could make out a few words. Back. No, not yet. I strained harder, trying to catch more. Footsteps moved in a slow arc again, then another voice, this one higher, thinner, answered with something I couldn't decipher. 2 people. Not just one. Working together? I backed away from the window, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't know if they were scouting rigs or surveilling or waiting for lapsed attention. But their pattern, slow circling, long silences, whispering in parts of the park that should have been empty, didn't feel random. I needed information, something to orient myself, something beyond instinctual fear. I dug into the pocket of my backpack, found my small flashlight, and angled it toward the floor so the beam wouldn't escape through a crack. I pulled up my phone and checked my signal. 1 bar. Maybe 2 if I held it against the ceiling, but you don't call for help when you're not sure what's happening, when your fear could be paranoia, when you can't describe the threat without sounding like the very thing you've always mocked, those overly dramatic travelers. So I waited. Again. Eventually the whispers faded, the footsteps went silent, and the familiar night sounds crept back in, the rustle of dry grass, the distant hum of the highway, the quiet groan of the woods stretching under the moonlight. But I didn't sleep. My mind raced through every instinct I'd ignored earlier. The Class C silhouette, the bathroom handprint, the figure on the swing, Ron's strange questions. Each piece on its own could be explained away, but together they drew a pattern I didn't want to look at. Around 3 a.m, exhaustion finally forced me to lie down. I didn't close my eyes. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the world outside shift and settle. And then I heard something that glued my spine to the mattress. A soft click at my rear door latch. I shot upright, knife in hand. Another click. The sound of someone testing the handle, gently, carefully, like they'd practiced keeping it quiet. My throat tightened until it hurt. I crawled silently toward the front of the van, keeping low. The handle jerked once, then again, more forceful this time. My pulse hammered through my temples, then a voice whispered from just outside. "He locked it." Another voice answered, closer now. "Try the other side." Cold sweat filmed my skin. Then my fingers trembled uncontrollably. And then a new sound, a door opening, not mine. The Class C across the road. I risked a small glance through the corner of the curtain. Ron, the manager, was standing between my van and the Class C, pale in the moonlight, still in that sheriff's jacket, holding something I couldn't see clearly. He said something too low for me to catch. The two figures standing near my van stepped back, not in surprise, in obedience. My stomach twisted. This wasn't random, this wasn't trespassers, this wasn't drunk campers or bored teenagers. This was coordinated. Ron gestured toward the dark tree line behind the sights. The two figures nodded and disappeared into the shadows between the rigs. Ron stood still for a long moment, facing my van, his expression eclipsed by darkness. Then he turned and walked back toward his office, slow and casual, as if he hadn't just sanctioned something. I stayed frozen in place long after he left. I don't know how much time passed before I finally let myself breathe again. My nerves were rattling so violently it felt like my bones were vibrating. Every instinct I had screamed a single truth. I needed to get out. Now. Before they came back. But starting the van would make noise. Headlights would cut through the dark like a beacon. And if they were waiting, if they were watching from the tree line, I might not make it off the property. I needed a plan. Something smart, something quiet, something now. So I crawled forward, carefully, slowly, toward the driver's seat. The moonlight leaked through the edge of the curtain, just enough to silhouette the steering wheel. And that's when I saw it. A fresh fingerprint smeared across the inside of the windshield. Not mine, and not there an hour ago. My breath left my chest in a strangled gasp. Someone had been inside my van earlier, and I hadn't even known. The sight of that fingerprint, fresh, oily, unmistakably human, hit me harder than anything I'd heard outside. Because everything up to that point still lived on the other side of a sheet of metal, still distant, still avoidable, but that print, that was intimate. That meant someone had stood exactly where I was now, in the dark, close enough to fog the glass with their breath, close enough that I might have been inches away, asleep or unaware. It meant the danger wasn't outside approaching. It had already visited. A tremor crawled across my skin. I forced myself to swallow, forced myself to think, forced myself to breathe despite the rising panic that wanted me frozen, helpless. Whatever had happened earlier, someone had entered quietly, moved silently, and left without leaving any other trace. I pressed a hand to the dash, grounding myself. No more hesitation. No more hoping fear was imagination. No more excuses that this was paranoia. This was happening. I needed out, but I needed out alive. I slid down from the driver's seat, staying low, listening again for footsteps, whispers, the drag of gravel. Nothing. The park felt still again, too still, like someone had hit pause on the entire landscape. I eased one curtain aside just half an inch, barely enough to peer through. The Class C across from me was dark again. No light, no movement, no silhouette. The swing set stood empty. The bathroom block was a silent shadow, and the line of trees behind it, darker than everything else. A black mouth swallowing the moonlight whole. If the two figures were waiting there, I couldn't see them, which made it worse. I needed noise cover, something to mask my startup, something to distract or slow them, something that would make leaving less like lighting a flare. Two ideas came to mind: the dumpsters and the water spigot near the office. Both could make loud, sudden sounds that might draw attention the other direction. But to use them, I'd have to leave the van. That thought alone tightened my chest. But staying was no longer safer. Staying was a slow sentence. And the fingerprint reminded me that whatever they were planning, the window for me to escape was already closing. I slid toward the side door, unlocking it with the gentlest push of my thumb. The click echoed louder than it should have, and I froze. No reaction. No footsteps. No shift in the air. I inched the door open and slipped out, crouching low behind the van. The night hit me with a cold slap, thick with the smell of dry dirt and overheated engine metal. The moon hung behind thin clouds, dimming the world into a pale grayscale. My van, normally a comfort, now felt like a liability. Too bright, too boxy, too visible. I moved around the back of it, sticking close to the shadows. From here, I could see the dumpsters near the far end. 2 large metal bins with the lids half open. If I pushed one hard enough, it would slam shut like a gunshot. A distraction. Hopefully enough of one. I checked the tree line again. Nothing moved. I bolted. Not a sprint, just a fast, quiet jog, soft-footed across gravel, breath tight in my chest. Every step felt louder than the last, even though I tried to make as little sound as possible. When I reached the dumpsters, I pressed my back against the corrugated metal, glancing around the side. Still no movement. I shoved the lid. The metal slam echoed across the entire park like thunder, sharp enough to make my ears ring, loud enough that anyone in the tree line would instinctively look. Without waiting, I darted back toward my van. Halfway there, a figure broke from the shadows near the trees. Tall, fast, running. The suddenness of it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. I sprinted hard, gravel skidding under my boots. My heart thundered so loud it blurred my hearing. I reached the van, threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it in one movement. My keys trembled in my hand. The figure reached the passenger side of the van just as the engine coughed to life. The van shook hard as they slammed their hand against the door, trying to wrench it open even though the lock held. I didn't think. I dropped the van into gear and stomped on the gas. The wheels spit gravel. The Volkswagen lurched forward and fishtailing slightly as it found traction. The person chasing me fell behind, but I saw their silhouette in my side mirror. Long limbs, pale shirt, arms raised in frustration or rage. I couldn't tell. I flew past the office, past the broken sign, past the swings. My hands shook so violently on the steering wheel I could barely keep the van straight. As I neared the exit, headlights suddenly flashed on behind me. Ron's truck. He pulled out fast, doggedly, closing the distance quicker than I expected for an old pickup. My breath hitched. I pushed the van harder. The engine protested. Volkswagens aren't made for speed, but I begged it under my breath like it could hear me. Come on, come on, come on, the exit sign loomed ahead. The narrow road to the highway glowed faintly under the moon. If I could reach that road, I had a chance. A real one. If I didn't, Ron's headlights grew brighter in my rearview mirror, bouncing wildly as the truck sped over potholes. He honked once, short, sharp, intentional. Not a warning. A command. I ignored it. I reached the end of the park road. The highway was just ahead. 5 seconds, maybe 4. I didn't slow down. Not even when I saw Ron's truck swerving into the opposite lane, trying to cut me off at the intersection. I jerked the wheel left and swerved around him so hard the van nearly tipped. Tires squealed. The world tilted, but I caught it, barely, and shot out onto the empty road. My chest heaved, hands were numb, my hands were numb. The van rattled like it might shake apart. Ron's truck didn't follow. I kept driving anyway. Not for a mile, not for 5, but for 20. Only when I reached a well-lit gas station did I finally pull over. I parked under the brightest floodlight, engine idling, breath coming in ragged bursts. It took several minutes before the shaking eased enough for me to think. I checked every door, every window, every lock. I paced around the van 3 times, making sure no one had stashed themselves underneath. When I finally got back inside, the adrenaline drained, leaving a cold emptiness in its place. A quiet that wasn't peace, but shock wearing a mask. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at my reflection in the windshield, watching the fluorescent lights blur across my tired eyes. Then I remembered the fingerprint. Still there, faint but visible. Proof. I wasn't imagining any of it. But something else hit me then. A realization sharper than fear, colder than dread. The fingerprint was on the inside of the windshield. Someone had been inside earlier. But I had never locked the van from inside before I went to the bathroom, meaning whoever had entered, they were already in the park, already watching, already waiting. And if I hadn't woken when I did, if the dumpster hadn't startled them, if I had brushed off the whispers as paranoia, I might not have driven out of that park at all. For a long time, I sat there under those gas station lights like a man waiting for his heartbeat to remember its rhythm. Cars passed on the highway. A semi rumbled by, loud enough to vibrate the asphalt. A family in a minivan pulled up to pump fuel, kids laughing in the back, oblivious to the way terror can follow someone like a second shadow. But none of it softened that pressure in my chest. None of it erased the feeling that the danger hadn't ended at the property line of that RV park, that something had crossed with me, lingering in my mind, tightening its grip. I kept replaying the moment I'd seen the fingerprint. Not the panic afterward, not the frantic escape, just that moment. Because a fingerprint is personal. It's not a threat shouted across a campground, it's not a broken branch, it's not footprints in mud, it's the imprint of someone's presence where they should never have been. Someone had stood inside my van looking out at the world through the same glass I looked through now. Maybe while I slept, maybe while I walked to the bathroom, maybe while I told myself everything felt off, but not off enough to leave. And somehow that knowledge frightened me more than the two shadows I'd seen running between the rigs, more than Ron's truck chasing me down the road. Someone had chosen me. I rubbed my eyes hard, trying to steady my breathing. Fear warps time. It also warps logic. I needed clarity. I needed to decide whether to call the police. But what would I tell them? That people whispered. That someone stood outside my van. That a fingerprint showed up inside my windshield. None of it connected to a law broken in a way a deputy would act on. And I knew that when small-town authorities investigate their own, the truth often gets buried deeper than the crime. I started the van again and pulled around the station, parked beside the side wall where the lights were bright and the shadow angles made it hard for anyone to approach unseen. I grabbed a large paper cup of coffee from inside, burnt, stale but hot, and sat back down in the driver's seat. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification, no number, no name, just a text from an unknown sender. You got out quicker than most. I froze. My fingers went cold around the cup. I stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over. My pulse crawled up my throat. I hadn't told anyone where I was. I hadn't posted. I hadn't called. And my van didn't have tracking. Someone had followed me, or someone in that park had eyes farther than the tree line. Before I could respond or decide whether to, 3 dots appeared, typing. I held my breath. Then, don't go back on the highway. A slow wave of nausea rose through me. I looked out into the night, scanning the parking lot, the road, the cars at the pumps. Nothing looked wrong. Nothing looked different. But the message wasn't a threat. It wasn't taunting. It was a warning. And warnings, in my experience, come from 2 types of people. Those who want you safe and those who want you afraid. My thumb hovered over the screen. I typed back, "Who is this?" No reply at first. Then the dots appeared again. Just someone who didn't get away in time. My skin prickled, goosebumps spreading in a cold ripple. I scanned the parking lot again, this time slower, but everyone looked normal. A college kid checking his trunk, a trucker rubbing his neck, a woman wiping her windshield, no one staring at me, no one standing too still, no one obvious. I typed again, "What do they want?" This time, the answer came quick. Travelers. People passing through, people no one looks for right away. My stomach turned. Another bubble appeared. You need to keep moving, not toward Cheyenne, not east. Don't take I-25. A map flashed in my mind. The park had been west of Cheyenne. If they knew which direction I'd flee, they might have people watching the major routes. The idea of them tracking me along those roads tightened my throat. I typed one more time. Where should I go? The reply took longer, almost a full minute. I watched the dots appear, vanish, reappear, as if the sender was struggling with the phrasing or debating whether they should say anything at all. Finally, take County Road 14 south. Don't stop until you hit the state park. Stay where there are people. Stay in light. Then another message. After tonight, change where you sleep for a while. Then, and don't use the same van in Wyoming again. My breath hitched. Whoever this was, they knew my rig, my location, my route. They knew enough to warn me not just for tonight, but long after. I typed again, fingers trembling now, adrenaline returning full force. Who are you? But no answer came. The dots never reappeared. The chat went still. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, my reflection faint in the glass, sweat beading along my hairline. I didn't have the luxury of disbelief. I didn't have the privilege of assuming this was a prank or coincidence. The messages were too specific, too urgent, too informed. So I took the advice. I left the gas station, sticking to the side streets behind the building and weaving my way south until I found the narrow sign for County Road 14. The road was empty, stretching dark and long between empty fields and sagging fences. I kept the van at a steady speed, scanning the rearview mirror every few seconds. No headlights behind me, no shapes along the roadside. But my nerves stayed sharp, electric. About 20 minutes in, I saw the glow of a state park entrance, cabins, RV pads, and a ranger station lit bright as a stadium. I pulled in, relief washing over me, raw and shaky. I parked beside the ranger station and stepped out. The warm yellow glow felt like a lifeline. A ranger inside noticed me and stepped out onto the porch. He was mid-50s, tall, calm eyes behind square glasses. "Late night?" he asked. My voice cracked a little. "Something like that. You all right?" I hesitated. "Better here than where I was." His eyebrows lifted with quiet understanding. "Trouble at another campground?" More than trouble. He didn't push, didn't pry. Just nodded once and said, "You're welcome to stay parked right here tonight. Brightest spot in the park. Cameras on this building, and I don't sleep much." A strange swell of gratitude rose in my chest. I nodded. "Thank you." "Bathrooms around the corner," he added gently. "Showers too. If you need anything, just knock." I thanked him again and returned to the van, the wheels still warm from the long drive. I shut off the engine but kept the interior lights off as I sat there listening to the quiet hum of safety. For the first time since leaving that RV park, I felt myself inhale fully. The ranger station glow softened the edges of my fear, but it didn't erase the truth. Someone had chosen me. Someone had entered my van. Someone had tried to circle me in the dark. And someone else, whoever they were, wanted me to survive what others hadn't. I leaned back in the driver's seat, letting the exhaustion hit me all at once. My body ached. My eyes burned, my hands trembled. But underneath the fear, something else stirred. Reflection. The kind that only comes after you outrun something you weren't supposed to outrun. If the road teaches you things, this night carved its lesson into bone. Danger isn't always supernatural. It doesn't always howl or whisper or call your name in the dark. Sometimes it stands under a porch light. Sometimes it wears a sheriff's jacket, sometimes it leaves fingerprints you don't notice until it's almost too late, and sometimes it texts you. I stayed parked beside the ranger station until the first faint blue lines of dawn stretched across the horizon. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I just sat there, wrapped in that thin blanket of safety, the way a drowning man clings to driftwood. Not because it's comfortable, but because it might be the only thing keeping him alive. Around 6 a.m, the ranger stepped out again with a mug of coffee in hand. Steam curled into the crisp air. He gave me a quiet nod, the kind older men give when they know better than to ask for explanations you're not ready to give. "Sun's up," he said. "If you want a real campsite for tonight, I can set you up. On the house." Normally, I would have refused any special treatment, but after the night I'd had, pride felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I nodded, stepped out of the van, and felt the weight of exhaustion collapse through my muscles. "Appreciate it," I said. He motioned for me to follow him toward the small office door. "There's a spot near the lake, open on 3 sides. Nothing can approach without you seeing it. Good for nerves." Good for nerves. Maybe that was his way of saying, I see the fear through your skin, even if you don't talk about it. Maybe he'd seen similar things, travelers running from something unnamed, Or maybe he just recognized the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from the road, but from people. Inside the station, fluorescent lights hummed softly. His desk was neatly organized. A small radio emitted static and half-formed weather updates. He clicked open a logbook and started writing down my plate number and site assignment. "What happened?" he asked finally. Not intrusive, not demanding, just offering space. I thought about telling him everything. The whispers, the figures, the fingerprint, the text from someone claiming to be trapped. But the words lodged in my throat. Speaking them felt like giving them life again, like conjuring the danger back. So I said, "Bad situation, wrong place, wrong night." He nodded like he understood more than he showed. "You're safe here. If you want to stay 2 nights, that's fine. If you want to stay a week, that's fine too." A week. The offer felt like a shelter, like someone handing you an umbrella in a storm where you'd forgotten what dryness felt like. "Thank you," I murmured. After he handed me the site permit, I drove slowly through the park until I reached the lakeside spot he'd assigned. Morning fog skimmed the surface of the water, drifting in long white ribbons. Ducks paddled near the reeds. A couple early morning kayakers slid by like shadows. Normal life. Real life. The kind that makes danger feel like a nightmare you woke from too late. But that feeling didn't last. As I parked and stepped out to stretch my legs, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. My stomach dropped. I almost didn't look. Almost threw the phone into the lake just to pretend the threat ended when I drove away. But fear doesn't disappear because you want it to, and ignoring danger is just an invitation for it to grow teeth. I opened the message. "They know you left the park." My pulse sharpened, fast and thin. Another message followed before I could even process the first. "Don't leave this state park until daylight tomorrow, and don't park near exits." Whoever this was, they had eyes on something. Information I didn't, and they were watching me, or at least tracking what mattered. My fingers trembled as I typed, "How do you know?" A long pause, long enough for my breath to turn shallow. Then, because they looked for me the same way. I sank down onto the step of the van, legs suddenly unsteady. The lake breeze brushed across my face, but it didn't cool the heat building under my skin. Another message. "Don't answer unknown knocks. Don't talk to anyone asking if you camped at Pine Shadow RV Park. They send people to scout." Pine Shadow. The name hit me like a punch. I hadn't known the park had a name, or maybe the sign had fallen or faded beyond recognition. But seeing it written out made it feel official. A place with intention. A place that wanted anonymity. My hands tightened on the phone. "Who are they?" I typed. This time the reply came fast. "Locals, park staff, people they pay, people they threaten, people they keep quiet. Missing travelers are easier to hide when no one's watching." The words carved into me with brutal clarity. I typed again, desperate now. "Why are you helping?" This time 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. Finally, "Because someone helped me once and I couldn't help her back. Her." The word dropped like a stone into the pit of my stomach. I typed, "What happened to her?" Silence. Long, suffocating silence. Then, "Don't let it happen to you." The chat ended there. No more messages, no explanation. Just another warning from someone who sounded like a ghost still tethered to the living world. I sat for a long time staring at the lake, the phone warm in my palm. Fear wanted to swallow me whole. But beneath it, beneath the trembling and adrenaline and confusion, another emotion rose. Anger. Not the blinding kind, not the reckless kind. The cold, steady kind that comes when someone tries to erase you from the world. When someone circles your van in the dark like your prey. When someone leaves fingerprints on the inside of your windshield as if claiming you before you even know what's happening. I wasn't going to be erased. I wasn't going to vanish into another off-season RV park disappearance. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let fear push me back onto the road without a plan. I spent the afternoon walking slow laps around the lake, forcing my breath into something steady, letting the normal world stitch my nerves back together. Kids laughed on the dock. Someone grilled burgers at a nearby campsite. A couple argued playfully about how to set up a hammock. Life went on, oblivious. And that's when it hit me, the thing I'd been trying not to see. The real danger wasn't that Pine Shadow RV Park existed. The real danger was that parks like it existed everywhere, hidden under cheerful names, under discount rates, under friendly greetings. Under people like Ron who wear old sheriff jackets and ask if you're traveling alone. This country is full of roads where no one would hear you scream, full of campgrounds where cell service dies, full of people who notice when you stop being cautious. True crime isn't a genre out here. It's a possibility, a probability if you're unlucky. But fear alone isn't a weapon. Awareness is. Instinct is. Refusing to ignore the signs is. The ranger checked on me around sunset, didn't ask questions, just nodded when he saw the exhaustion in my eyes. "Stay close to the lights," he said. So I did. Night came softly over the lake, cool, calm, brushed with the distant chirp of crickets. Nothing like the suffocating darkness of Pine Shadow. But even in safety, tension curled inside me. Not panic, not dread, just the quiet suspicion that survival wasn't the end of the story. Survival was the beginning, because what happened to me wasn't an accident. And someone out there, the person who texted me, was still trapped in whatever Pine Shadow really was. I owed her more than silence. I owed myself more than fear. And as the moon rose above the trees, reflecting silver over the lake, I realized something else. If I ever wanted to sleep again, I'd have to go back. Not to stay, but to learn the truth. The decision didn't come from courage. It didn't come from anger either, though that was still simmering somewhere under my ribs. It came from something quieter, sharper, an instinct that had been ignored too many times in the last 24 hours. A sense that if I didn't understand what happened at Pine Shadow, then I'd spend the rest of my life glancing over my shoulder, imagining footsteps where there were none. Dawn broke slowly the next morning, spreading pale light across the lake like a thin bandage. I hadn't slept more than an hour, drifting in and out of uneasy dreams. When I finally climbed out of the van, my bones felt hollow, like everything in me had been scraped out and replaced with tension. I walked to the ranger station, not because I planned to tell him everything, but because I needed to look someone steady in the eyes and remember what normal human presence felt like. He was sipping coffee again when I arrived, radio murmuring weather conditions behind him. "Rough night?" he asked gently. "Still catching up from the last one," I murmured. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. People underestimate what a bad campground can do to the mind. The brain remembers more than the body does. I swallowed hard. He didn't know how true that was. After a beat, he added, "If you're leaving today, stick to main roads. Don't take any of the isolated backways. Too many blind corners." Something in his tone made me pause. Not fear, not suspicion, something closer to caution carved from experience. "You ever heard of Pine Shadow RV Park?" I asked before I could stop myself. His expression didn't change, didn't flicker. "Can't say I have. Should I have?" "No," I replied quickly. Too quickly. He narrowed his eyes, not accusing, just curious. But he let it go. I thanked him for his help, walked back to the van, and sat behind the wheel staring at the lake. I felt the pull of safety, the temptation to stay another day, another week. But safety is just a lullaby when danger is unfinished. And something inside me, something heavy, something unsettling, told me Pine Shadow wasn't done with me. Around 9 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. A new message from the same unknown number. "You stayed." The words tightened every muscle in my body. I typed back, "I needed time to think." A pause, then, "Good, but you can't go back." I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. I typed, "I'm not going back to stay. I'm going back to understand." The response came instantly. Understanding is what got people killed. I typed again, hands steady even though everything inside me trembled. Why me? Why that night? This time, silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the conversation was over. Then, because they watch for travelers who look tired, alone, vehicles easy to break into, people who won't be missed for a few days. Tired, alone, easy to break into. The words felt like a mirror held uncomfortably close. I typed again, "What do they do with people?" The reply chilled me. "Depends who gets to you first." That was all. No elaboration, no clarification. Just that. A gust of wind rattled the leaves overhead. It startled me more than it should have. I sat for a long time, elbows on my knees, phone dangling from one hand. My instincts were at war, one part of me begging to leave Wyoming entirely, the other part knowing I wouldn't be able to live with myself without understanding what kind of evil hides behind shattered windows and lonely rows of abandoned rigs. Eventually, I pulled out a notebook from the glove compartment. I started writing everything I remembered: time of night, voices, movements, the Class C, the swing set, the fingerprint, the texts, the chase, the person warning me. I didn't trust memory alone anymore. When I was done, I tore out the page, folded it, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. If anything happened to me, someone should find it. Someone should know. I started the engine. Not toward Pine Shadow. Not yet. First, I drove into town. I stopped at a diner where the waitress refilled my coffee 3 times without asking questions. I listened to the murmur of conversations at nearby tables, trying to figure out if anyone mentioned missing travelers. No one did. Then I stopped at an auto shop to pick up new locks for the van. The mechanic handed them to me with the offhand warning, "You traveling through the outskirts? Lock everything twice. Folks get weird out there." Weird. I couldn't help but laugh under my breath. Then, before heading anywhere near Pine Shadow, I went to the county library. I sat at a computer terminal and started searching. Not for Pine Shadow, that didn't appear on any map. Not under that name. Not under any variation of it. Instead, I searched for unsolved disappearances, Cheyenne region, missing RV travelers, Wyoming, abandoned campgrounds, crime investigations, frontage road, RV incident, Cheyenne sheriff complaints. 20 years ago, the results were scattered, fragmented, but a few threads emerged. Missing travelers, 3 years apart, no remains found, last seen west of Cheyenne, vehicles located days later on remote access roads, personal belongings left behind. Cases labeled as likely voluntary missing persons. No formal suspects. My pulse tightened with each line I read. Then I found something smaller, an article from 6 years ago. A woman who vanished after leaving an RV park outside Cheyenne. Park never named, vehicle found abandoned, case quietly closed. My breath hitched. The article included one small photo, a sheriff in a jacket that looked distinctly familiar. My stomach twisted. I clicked the image to enlarge it. The resolution was grainy, but the outline, the posture, the jawline, it was him. Ron, my whole body froze. I sat there in the library, hands hovering over the keyboard, heart pounding as realization sank in. He wasn't just a park manager. He wasn't just someone with a suspicious stare. He was a person with history, with access, with connections, with a badge he still wore like a shadow of authority. And Pine Shadow likely wasn't the first place he'd run. I printed the article, tucked it with the note in my jacket pocket, and walked out of the library with a clarity sharper than fear. I wasn't going back to Pine Shadow because I wanted closure. I was going back because someone needed to expose whatever happened there, and because someone who still texted me from the shadows might still be alive. I drove slowly toward the outskirts, careful not to get too close. Around midday, I found a turnout overlooking the valley where Pine Shadow lay hidden between clusters of cottonwoods. I parked and stepped out, binoculars in hand. The park looked still, quiet, harmless even, a place no one would think twice about passing. But my chest tightened anyway, because evil rarely looks like evil from a distance. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, no figures, no shadows, no whispers in the wind. Then, just as I lowered the binoculars, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from the same unknown number. If you can see the park, they can see you. My breath caught. I spun back toward the van, slipping behind the door for cover, eyes scanning the valley like prey that just realized the predator isn't behind them. It's below them, watching. I typed with trembling fingers, "Where are you? Tell me where." The reply came instantly. "Closer than you think." The message sat on my screen like a pulse, steady, cold, impossible to ignore. Closer than you think. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. The wind slid across the turnout in a low, uneasy hush, carrying the dry smell of dust and something faintly metallic like rusted nails. I pressed my back to the van door and scanned the valley again, slower this time, letting my eyes adjust to the distance, the angles, the shifting shadows. Nothing. But nothing was exactly what terrified me, because nothing meant they were good at hiding, or good at watching without being seen. I crouched low and drifted around to the driver's side, staying behind the metal like it was the only shield I had left. My thumb hovered above the keyboard, my breath shallow. "Where?" I typed. Seconds stretched. My pulse thudded in my ears. Then the dots appeared. "You're not ready to know," I whispered into the wind. "Then why tell me you're close?" The answer arrived like it had been waiting in the dark, so you don't make the same mistake she did. That word again. She. The one person the stranger couldn't save. My hands tightened until my knuckles ached. I forced myself to type, "Tell me what happened, please." Another pause. Longer, heavier. Then, she went back alone, and she trusted daylight. Daylight. The safest illusion in the world. I swallowed hard, scanning the valley again. The park looked quiet in the afternoon sun, the rows of faded rigs casting long shadows. Nothing moved, but in that stillness something felt wrong. Wrong in the way an empty room feels wrong when you know someone just left it. My phone buzzed again. "If you go down there now, you won't come back." A chill cut through me. The wind picked up, sweeping across the barren turnout in a long, hollow sigh. It tugged at my jacket, at the edges of the note inside pocket, the one I'd written just in case I didn't make it back. I typed, "I'm not going down now. I just needed to see it." A single word came back, "Good." And then another, "Leave." I hesitated. The fear was still there, thick, breathing down my neck, but so was something deeper. Quiet, steady, stubborn. "I can't leave," I whispered. Not typing it, just speaking it into the space between me and that place. Not without knowing what they're doing. My phone buzzed again, almost like they'd heard me. "Knowing won't save you. Distance will." I leaned back against the van, closing my eyes for a moment, feeling the tension coil tight inside me. But fear wasn't the dominant emotion anymore. It was something more complicated, guilt maybe, or a responsibility I didn't want but couldn't shake. Someone had warned me, someone hadn't been warned, and someone hadn't survived. My phone vibrated again, one last message. "They see you." My heart stopped cold. I whipped the binoculars up again, scanning the park. Every second, the image shifted, blurred, refocused. I checked the office, the empty playground, the tree line, the rows of abandoned rigs. Nothing. Then, at the far edge of the park, near the trail that led into the old cottonwoods, I saw it. A figure, still, facing directly toward me. They didn't move, didn't shift their weight, didn't walk or wave or step forward. They just watched. A shadow carved against the sun. My stomach dropped. The distance between us was too far to see a face, too far to know if it was Ron or one of the people who whispered or someone entirely different. But whoever it was, they were standing in the exact direction of this turnout, as if they knew someone was here, watching them watch me. I dropped the binoculars, kicked dust behind me, and slid into the driver's seat. My pulse slammed against my throat as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, louder than it had in days. I checked the mirror. The figure was gone. Just gone. My breath shuddered. I floored it. Gravel spat like sparks as the tires tore into the road. I didn't look back again until I was miles away, until the valley dipped out of sight and the last sliver of pine shadow disappeared behind the curve of the earth. Only then did I slow down enough to breathe. But breathing didn't calm me, because escaping danger is different from escaping fear. Fear chases. Fear remembers. Fear waits in the quiet corners of your mind. By the time I reached the next town, exhaustion hit me so hard I had to pull into a grocery store parking lot just to steady my hands. But I didn't stay. Couldn't. Not with the message echoing inside me. They see you. I drove another hour east, then south, then east again, zigzagging until the landscape finally felt unfamiliar. Only when the sun dipped low enough to paint the sky with deep oranges and purples did I park behind a well-lit truck stop and step out, letting the cold air wash over my face. The sky stretched endless above me, calm and uncaring. People moved around me, drivers, families, travelers, the normal chaos of a well-lit place at dusk. For the first time since Pine Shadow, I felt invisible. And invisibility, after fear, is a kind of mercy. I leaned against my van and let everything unravel inside me. Every whisper, every footstep, every tap on the metal, every moment I thought I wouldn't live to see daylight. Then I remembered the final message. She went back alone. I whispered into the dark, I won't. I wasn't done with Pine Shadow. I wasn't done with the truth. But I wasn't going back alone, and I wasn't going back tonight or tomorrow or even next week. Some truths require light. Some truths require a plan. Some truths require witnesses. And some truths require more courage than fear can kill. As the night settled around me, the events of the last 2 days pressed into my bones, sharpening one thing to perfect clarity. The real danger in RV parks isn't superstition. It isn't shadows. It isn't the noises you can't explain. The real danger is people. People who know the land better than you. People who wait for the right traveler. People who wear authority like camouflage. People who disappear others because they think no one's looking. But someone looked this time. Me. And someone warned me. Whoever they were, the voice in the dark, the stranger sending messages, I owed them a chance to escape what I barely outran. The road behind me felt heavy, but the road ahead felt alive. Uncertain, dangerous, but alive. I climbed into my van, locked the doors twice, and stared at my reflection in the windshield. Tired, wired, forever changed. Then I whispered the truth aloud, not to comfort myself, but to carve the lesson deep. You must trust your fear before you trust anyone else. The engine hummed beneath me. The road stretched into darkness, and as I pulled away from the truck stop, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Pine Shadow wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. I remember the first time I felt the mountains weren't just still. They were watching. I was 29, and my Volkswagen Westphalia, faded teal with a dented side panel from some careless hitch in Pennsylvania, rumbled along the winding roads of the Appalachian backcountry. My friend, Claire, a wiry, fearless woman with a streak of curiosity that always got her into trouble, sat beside me, tapping on the dash like she was trying to summon something. We had heard whispers of the old forest paths from locals in Boone, North Carolina, tales of people vanishing near forgotten campgrounds, strange lights flickering through the trees, and sounds that weren't animals but not human either. I had always laughed it off, told myself it was just folklore. That night, I learned the truth has a way of waiting quietly until it doesn't. We parked at a small pull-off, barely a clearing really, marked by the remnants of an old fire ring and broken down wooden posts that might have been signs at one time. The forest around us pressed close, the pines so thick their shadows merged into a wall. We had no cell service, no other campers, just the rustle of wind through the leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. The air smelled damp, the kind of moisture that seeps into your bones, makes your clothes stick to your skin. I set up the stove while Claire unpacked her journal, scribbling notes about the stories she had collected. I should have noticed the quiet first. It was not the absence of sound. It was too precise, too deliberate. Birds didn't call, and even the wind seemed muffled. At first, I chalked it up to the deep Appalachian forest swallowing everything. But then, as I fumbled with the stove, I heard it, a faint snapping of a twig, maybe 10 feet from our van. My heart jumped, and I told myself it was a deer, some nocturnal animal. Claire laughed when I mentioned it, her voice bright and defiant, but even she went quiet after a few minutes. There was something in that sound that didn't belong. Night came quickly. The Westphalia, cramped and familiar, became our shelter. I lit a lantern, the yellow glow painting the interior in soft, reassuring circles of light. We ate canned beans straight from the pot, trading stories and theories. Claire insisted on exploring a little, just 100 feet or so along the faint path that curved into the undergrowth. I didn't want to go, a dull tension gnawing at my gut, but I followed anyway. The smell of wet earth mixed with pine resin was overpowering, almost suffocating. We didn't get far before we heard it again, something moving just beyond the trees. Not fast, not a dash like an animal fleeing, but deliberate, slow, deliberate. I froze. Claire, always fearless, whispered my name, asking if I heard it too. The way she said it, though, carried a tremor I hadn't heard before. My mind raced, trying to rationalize. Could be a bear, could be someone else camping. But deep down, the feeling settled in my chest, heavy and insistent. We were not alone, and this was not ordinary. Hours passed with intermittent sounds, branches snapping, a deep thump against a distant tree trunk, low growls that didn't belong to any creature I knew. The shadows of our lantern seemed to move with the wind, yet every so often I caught glimpses of shapes, fleeting and impossible. Once, I swear I saw a figure tall, covered in dark fur, crouched at the edge of the clearing, watching. The fear at that moment was electric, a sharp, twisting thing that made my palms sweat and my legs weak. I told myself I was imagining it, that stress and isolation were painting shadows into monsters. But even when I closed my eyes, I could feel it. Its eyes, heavy and intent, pressing on me from the dark. We huddled inside the van, doors locked, the engine running occasionally to keep the battery alive. Claire, normally talkative, was silent for long stretches, scribbling notes about what she called cryptid patterns, her pen moving like a frantic heartbeat. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the van, every whistle of the wind made my heart jump. Around 2 a.m., the real panic began. A series of knocks, 3 deliberate, then a pause, then one, echoed against the van walls. Too heavy for a branch, too purposeful for anything natural. I whispered Claire's name, voice tight, barely a thread. We waited. Nothing. And then a sound outside the driver's side window, a dragging, scraping noise that made my stomach churn. Claire held my hand, and I could feel her pulse, frantic and unsteady. I wanted to tell myself we should leave, that we should drive out right now, but my mind was trapped in disbelief, terror, and fascination all at once. We watched, barely breathing, as something large moved just at the edge of the lantern light, its silhouette a nightmare of limbs too long, a posture too human, yet impossibly animal. It didn't attack, it didn't roar, it just watched. The tension was unbearable, and every instinct screamed to escape, yet our feet were glued, our voices locked in silent terror. Eventually, it receded, vanishing into the black, leaving only broken branches and the lingering sense of being studied. That night, I realized fear isn't just about the moment. It's about knowing you are small, exposed, and utterly seen by something beyond comprehension. By dawn, the fog rolled in, thick and damp, curling through the forest like a living thing. Claire and I didn't speak much, just packed silently, our movements mechanical. The lingering dread had shaped us, tightening our shoulders, making every step deliberate. As we drove back down the winding road, the Westphalia rattling and groaning under the weight of our fear, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhilaration. We had survived, but survival had transformed the way we saw the forest. It was alive in ways I had never imagined, and somewhere in those shadows, whatever watched us was still there, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in. By the time we reached the small diner on the edge of town, the sun had burned away the mist, leaving the world mundane, almost forgiving. We ordered coffee in silence, the warmth doing little to melt the chill still clinging to our bones. Claire finally spoke, her voice low, reverent. "You know," she said, "we'll never look at these mountains the same way again." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The Appalachians were no longer just a backdrop for adventure. They were a cathedral of fear, a place where curiosity met consequence, and lessons were carved into the memory with every unseen eye and every step into the unknown. Driving away, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the tall figure trailing us along the road. Of course, there was nothing, yet the unease remained. That night in the Westphalia, the forest taught me something vital. Preparation, vigilance, and respect aren't just about survival. They're about understanding your own limits, your own instincts, and the raw, untamed pulse of nature that will never fully be tamed. Fear had become a teacher, cryptic and uncompromising, and I was, reluctantly, a willing student. Even after that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us, lingering in the corners of my vision as I drove through familiar roads. Claire tried to joke about it, saying I was letting my imagination run wild, but I could see it in her eyes, the same tight knot of unease I carried. We decided to return to the same area a week later, this time with another friend, Marcus, a local hiker who claimed to know the trails better than anyone in the county. He laughed when we told him our story, brushing it off as woods superstition. But there was an intensity to his gaze, a caution he didn't voice, that made me uneasy. We parked the Westphalia in a slightly larger clearing than before, near a creek that gurgled softly under the morning sun. The forest was alive with sound this time, birds calling, wind whispering through the canopy, but something about the trees still felt deliberate. Marcus led the way, stepping over roots and rocks with ease, explaining the hidden paths, the old logging trails, and spots that hikers never touched. I tried to focus on his voice, on the safety of daylight, but the memory of the figure from last week kept tugging at my mind. Every shadow seemed too long, every rustle too precise. By mid-afternoon, we had reached a small hollow deep in the forest, a place where moss clung to every surface and sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy. Marcus paused, scanning the area, and said something that made my stomach knot. "People don't usually come here," he said quietly, "and those who do, they don't leave the same." He didn't elaborate, just gave me a look that said he'd seen something he couldn't explain. My hands tightened around my backpack straps. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger, almost tangible, like the forest itself had taken a breath and was holding it, waiting. Claire, always fearless, wandered toward the creek, her laughter cutting through the tension, but even that sounded strained. She called out to us suddenly, her voice high and panicked. "Did you see that?" I ran to her, Marcus following behind, and she pointed to the far side of the creek. There was a shape, tall, dark, impossibly fast, that vanished into the trees before we could get a proper look. My heart slammed against my chest. I wanted to convince myself it was a deer, a bear, anything, but the way it moved, upright, deliberate, made that impossible. The rest of the afternoon became a haze of tension. Every snap of a twig, every brush of leaves against bark sent us into defensive silence. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a person, a local playing a prank, but something in the rhythm of its movements, the way it avoided clearings, told me otherwise. This wasn't a prank. This was a predator of observation, an intelligence that had learned to hide in plain sight, to use the forest itself as camouflage. As night fell, the forest transformed again. Shadows lengthened, twisted into shapes that shouldn't exist. Marcus, normally unflappable, suggested we return to the van. I agreed immediately, relief washing over me as we retraced our steps. The Westphalia never felt so comforting. Inside, we huddled together, lantern light throwing wavering circles on the ceiling, trying to ignore the noises outside. Branches cracked, distant thumps echoed, and the faint scraping noise returned, this time closer, along the tree line beside the van. Claire and I stayed awake, glued to the windows, trying to catch a glimpse. At one point, a shadow flickered across the side, impossible to pin down, and I swear I saw the outline of a face, long, narrow, with deep-set eyes that glinted in the lantern's reflection. Panic clawed at my throat, and I realized that no rational explanation would soothe the fear now. We weren't in the forest as visitors. We were being observed, studied, tested. The tension became a living thing, pressing on us, bending our perception of space and time. At some point, I drifted into a restless sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sound that made me freeze entirely. The sliding of something large, something deliberate, against the side of the van. My heart pounded so hard it was a physical weight. Marcus muttered something incoherent, half asleep, and Claire squeezed my hand, both terrified and fascinated. I debated whether to open the door to confront whatever it was, but the fear was paralyzing. Instead, we held our breath, each second stretching into eternity until the noise stopped. By dawn, the creature, or whatever it was, had vanished, leaving only broken twigs and a strange, lingering odor, earthy and metallic, that clung to the forest air. We packed quickly, our movements hurried and precise, and I realized that none of us had spoken a word the entire way back. The Westphalia carried us through the winding mountain roads, our silence a testament to the unspoken understanding. The forest had won. It wasn't malicious, not in the way humans understand. It was simply itself, ancient, alive, unknowable, and we had trespassed into its domain. In the weeks after that trip, I found myself replaying the encounter over and over, analyzing every sound, every shadow, trying to convince myself I hadn't seen what I had. But every time I closed my eyes, the silhouette returned, the sense of being watched pressing on my chest like a physical weight. I began to understand something vital. Fear is not just an emotion to be conquered. It is a guide, a measure of instinct and respect. The forest, the mountains, the shadows, they were teaching us to move carefully, to observe, to listen, to understand our own limitations. I kept returning to the Appalachian backcountry over the next few months, each trip a delicate dance between curiosity and caution. Sometimes alone, sometimes with friends who were less skeptical than Marcus had been. Each visit reinforced the lessons of that first night. The woods are full of life you can't name, life that notices every movement, every sound. And if you are not vigilant, the lessons are not gentle. I learned to sleep with the windows slightly open, to hear the forest breathe and understand what was natural and what was deliberate. I learned to move slowly along hidden trails, to carry light but not let it blind me to shadows. I learned to trust my gut, to honor the unease that had once seemed irrational. Each encounter with the unknown, whether it was a glimpse of movement in the underbrush, a faint knock on the van, or the scraping of something large against a distant tree, was a reminder that we are small in the face of the wild. And yet that smallness is not weakness. It is clarity. It is humility. It is survival. By the end of that season, I began to write about these experiences, not to scare people, not to seek validation, but to capture the raw lessons hidden in the Appalachian night, the delicate balance between fear and respect, curiosity and caution, thrill and survival. The Volkswagen, my constant companion through the winding back roads, became more than a vehicle. It was a refuge, a vantage point, a place from which I could observe the forest without losing myself entirely to it. And every time I rolled its windows down, every time I felt the damp mountain air press against my skin, I remembered that night, that fear, and the creature that watched us. Because in the end, the forest does not forget, and neither should we. Fear is not the enemy, it is the teacher, and those who heed it, who learn from it, walk away changed, stronger, wiser, more alive than they had been before. The Appalachian shadows may still hide things that cannot be named, figures that cannot be tracked, and eyes that watch without blinking. But I am no longer naive, no longer careless. I have learned to move with respect, to listen with care, and to embrace the lessons of fear, so that the next time curiosity calls, I am ready. It was late October when I decided to return one last time alone in the Westphalia. The trees had turned, their leaves fire red and gold, and the chill in the air carried the scent of damp earth and decaying foliage. I told myself it was about closure, about confronting the fear that had lingered like a shadow over every camping trip since that first night. I parked in a clearing deeper than any I had visited before, near a stream whose water ran black and silent under the fading sunlight. The forest welcomed me with its eerie stillness, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig magnified in the quiet. I set up the van as I always did, folding out the bed, laying out my journal, and lighting a small lantern. But this time I was hyper-aware. Every sense was sharpened, tuned to the rhythm of the forest. I noticed the odd symmetry of fallen branches, the unnatural spacing of rocks, the faint depressions in the undergrowth that hinted at something moving deliberately through the dark. Hours passed, and the forest remained patient, watching, waiting. I ate slowly, the taste of beans metallic on my tongue, my hands trembling slightly despite my best effort to remain composed. Around midnight, the tension snapped. I heard it first as a low, rolling growl resonating from the tree line across the clearing. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I stayed seated, heart hammering, lantern light shaking in my hands. Then, from the shadows near the van, came a sound that made me wish I had never returned. The deliberate, slow scraping of something large along the metal side. My breath caught, and for a moment, I thought I might faint. Then I saw it, or I felt it, just beyond the edge of the lantern's glow. It stood upright, impossibly tall, fur dark as midnight, with limbs that bent at angles no human or bear should possess. Its eyes, glinting faintly, were intelligent, assessing, almost clinical in their attention. Fear struck me not with a roar or charge, but with recognition. This creature was aware of me in a way that humans rarely encounter another being. Every instinct in my body screamed to flee, yet I couldn't move. My hands gripped the journal, knuckles white, and I whispered into the night, half to myself, half in defiance. I see you. I understand you. The figure didn't move. It simply lingered, watching, measuring, perhaps deciding whether I was to be prey or observer. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by my uneven breathing. Then, slowly, deliberately, it stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the dense undergrowth. The sound of leaves brushing against its massive frame lingered longer than any sound should, echoing in my mind. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the van, lantern low, watching the tree line, writing furiously in my journal, trying to capture the feeling of being utterly seen and yet untouched. By morning, fog rolled over the clearing, blurring the edges of the forest like watercolors bleeding into one another. I packed slowly, savoring the clarity that came after fear, the kind of understanding that changes you permanently. The forest had tested me, measured my curiosity, my respect, my willingness to observe without intrusion, and I had survived. Not by confrontation, not by aggression, but by humility, vigilance, and attention to instincts I had once doubted. Driving back down the winding Appalachian roads, the Westphalia rattling and groaning under the weight of my experiences, I realized the forest wasn't something to conquer. It was something to listen to. The cryptid, if it could be called that, was a reminder that the unknown is not inherently evil. It is ancient, adaptive, and indifferent to human fear. But it is also a mirror, reflecting our own awareness, patience, and respect. I thought about Claire and Marcus, how we had all been shaped by those nights, and I understood the true lesson. Fear is not weakness. Fear is guidance. It teaches you to observe, to respect, to prepare, and it rewards those who learn with clarity, insight, and survival. When I finally reached the edge of the forest, where the trees opened to highway and civilization, I paused. The fog had lifted, the sun breaking through in streaks of pale gold. I looked back at the Appalachian slopes, at the dense, shadowed trees, and I felt gratitude. For the fear, for the lessons, for the knowledge that there is more in this world than we can name, measure, or control. My Volkswagen, battered and weary, had carried me through it all, a steadfast companion through terror and revelation alike. I've returned since, on other trips, with friends who wanted to see, to feel, to learn. Each time the forest reminds you the same truths. Move slowly, observe carefully, honor the unseen. Each encounter, fleeting or lingering, strengthens something in the human spirit. The ability to acknowledge fear, to respect the unknown, and to emerge transformed. Even now, when I drive through those winding Appalachian roads, the memories press against my chest, the sense of being watched, never entirely gone. The cryptid, the forest, the shadows, they are a part of me now, as much as my curiosity, my courage, and my respect. And every time I open the Westphalia's door, step into the chill mountain air, and let the fog curl around me, I know one thing. Fear is not a punishment. Fear is a teacher, relentless, uncompromising, and utterly necessary. And those who listen, who learn, who respect, will find that the wilderness, dark, unknowable, and alive, has lessons more profound than any story, more real than any legend, and more enduring than any fear. The Appalachians will always hold secrets, shapes that vanish into the mist, eyes that follow without blinking, and paths that test your courage. But the Volkswagen, the journal, the careful steps taken in respect and awareness are proof that you can navigate the unknown, confront the terror, and emerge wiser, braver, and deeply alive. And perhaps, if you listen closely, the forest will teach you what it taught me, that the unseen is never entirely unknowable, and the greatest encounters are those that transform not just your body, but your mind and spirit as well. The night I learned what fear really is didn't begin with a scream or a shadow. It began with a silence so deep it felt like it had weight. My name's Evan Keller, I'm 34, and I've been camping out of my old Volkswagen Westphalia for most of my adult life. I've driven through every kind of weather this country can dream up. I've slept in deserts that felt like they were made of heat and bone, forests so thick they swallowed sound, and mountain passes where the horizon looked like it could cut you open. I've always believed that if you respect the land, it respects you back. That if you listen closely, the wild tries to teach you things. But sometimes the lesson isn't one you expect. Sometimes the lesson is survival. The place that taught me that sits in the far, cracked outskirts of northern Arizona, an RV park so remote it barely qualifies as a park at all. Most folks blow past it doing 80 with the windows up, eyes locked on the next town. But I wasn't most folks back then. I was drawn to places that looked forgotten, places that didn't ask for anything except your willingness to sit still long enough to feel them. I'd been dealing with a grief I hadn't wanted to name after my brother passed, and out there, under big empty skies, I thought I might be able to hear myself again. When I first pulled up, the place was nothing more than a stretch of gravel, a sagging bathhouse, and a row of crooked electrical posts that buzzed louder than the cicadas. No host, no ranger, no office. Just a wooden board with a faded, "Leave cash in the Dropbox" sign. The kind of place where no one counts who comes in or who goes out. And that night, I wanted exactly that. The sun had already dropped behind the red cliffs, leaving a bruise of purple across the sky. The air smelled like sagebrush and old rain. I backed my VW into the last spot on the edge of the lot where the gravel broke into open desert. It was quiet, the kind of quiet you don't question because it feels honest. I remember thinking the stillness felt like mercy. But an hour after sunset, that stillness turned on me. I first noticed it when I stepped out to stretch my legs. The breeze that had carried the smell of sage was gone. The hum of insects had cut off like someone flipping a breaker. Even the gravel beneath my boots felt different, softer, like it didn't want to crunch. I stood there for a minute, confused, running a hand through my hair, listening. Not just for sounds, for the lack of them. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe the temperature shifted, maybe the wind just died, maybe the animals moved on. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt that something was missing, something fundamental, like the desert had drawn in a long breath and forgotten how to let it out. I climbed back into the van and shut the door firmly, trying to shake off the weird tingle that crawled up my spine. I've been through odd nights before, strange animal calls, temperature drops, the feeling of being watched by something wild and hungry. But this wasn't that. This was like the land itself was waiting. I turned on the small LED light over to the kitchenette, trying to bring myself back into the comfort of normalcy. I heated water for tea, pulled out my journal, and told myself I'd sleep early. That's when I heard the first tap. I froze, mug halfway to my lips. It wasn't loud. If anything, it was barely there, like a fingertip brushing the metal outside. I lowered the mug and waited. Another tap, this time on the opposite side of the van. Then a third on the back hatch. Light, soft, spaced out. Not random, not wind. The kind of tapping someone makes when they don't want to scare you. They want your attention. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My instinct told me it was a person, and that should have been the comforting answer. But the taps traveled in a slow circle around the van. Left panel, back bumper, sliding door. Too smooth, too measured. Like someone was walking around me, dragging a hand across the metal. Testing the shape of me. I swallowed hard, and the air felt thick, stale. I shut off the light. The darkness didn't make me feel safer, but it made me feel less visible. I pressed my ear to the van wall, the metal cold against my skin. Nothing. No footsteps in the gravel, no breathing, no voice. I waited longer than I want to admit, listening for anything. The desert didn't give me a thing back. After a while, the tapping stopped, but the silence didn't. It stretched long and heavy until my nerves felt frayed. I locked every door, then double-checked, and just when I thought maybe my mind really had grabbed hold of the wrong shadow, the taps returned. A single one this time. Right beside my head, not a knock. A nail, slow, deliberate. A scraping trail that moved upward like whatever was outside was tracing the van panel with something sharp. A part of me, the rational, grounded part, tried to come up with explanations. Loose branch, no trees. A bird, not big enough. Some kind of desert critter, they don't drag nails 3 feet up a van wall. The scraping paused and a soft exhale whispered against the metal. Not the wind. Breath. Human breath. I stumbled backward in the dark, hitting the tiny counter with my hip, pain jolting through me but grounding me. My thoughts scrambled. Should I start the engine? Should I shout? Should I grab the flashlight and check? My instincts didn't give me a clean answer. Fear pressed on all of them, twisting them into knots. Then the breath came again. Longer this time, like someone was leaning their full weight against the van, listening to me, listening to them. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. My chest tightened. A dead battery didn't make sense. The van had started fine earlier. I tried again and again. Nothing. And then came the worst sound of the night. A whisper. Not loud. Not rushed. A breath shaped into a single word that slid through the metal like it didn't belong to a voice at all. Evan. I felt my whole body lock. There are moments when your brain breaks its own rules, when it knows something is impossible, but your bones feel the truth anyway. No one out here knew my name. I hadn't spoken it to anyone. I hadn't seen another human being since the last gas station 30 miles back. But something outside spoke it like it had been practicing. That's when the panic cut through me, sharp and hot. My hands shook as I dug under the passenger seat, grabbing the old emergency flare I kept there. My lungs pulled in air too fast. I needed noise, light, something real to cut through the wrongness. I flung open the sliding door and fired the flare into the night. It burst like a shard of sun, red and blinding, flooding the desert floor with light. And there was nothing. No footprints, no figure, no one running, hiding, crouching, just the sagging power posts, the gravel lot, and the endless stretch of desert swallowing the horizon. But the silence didn't break. It deepened, and I realized the flare had only lit the world outside, not the thing that whispered. Whatever it was, it hadn't been outside the van. It had been right next to me, inside the silence itself, inside the place where sound should have been. My breath caught as the realization hit me. I wasn't dealing with a person or an animal or anything with weight or movement. I was dealing with something that lived in the absence, something that filled silence the way others fill air. And it knew my name. The flare hissed out in the dirt, shrinking to a red coal, and the darkness rushed back in like it had been waiting just beyond the edge of the light. My eyes strained against it, trying to catch movement, a silhouette, something to blame all this on. But the desert wasn't offering me anything except emptiness, the kind that feels too deliberate, too clean, the kind that's hiding something by pretending not to. I stepped backward into the van, sliding the door shut with a trembling hand. I locked it instinctively, even though deep down I knew a simple lock wasn't what I needed protection from. Still, muscle memory kicked in. Fear makes you cling to rituals, even pointless ones. I pressed my back against the kitchenette, listening to my breath tremble in the stillness. I wished I could hear the hum of the fridge, the distant buzz of the power posts, anything that meant the world was behaving normally. But the silence was absolute, airtight, like sound itself had been drained from the air. My mind spun. Had grief messed with me so badly that I was hearing things? Was my exhaustion turning shadows into whispers? But the way that voice formed my name, the rhythm, the breath behind it, there was no imagining that. I'd heard my name spoken thousands of times, but never like that. Never with that strange mixture of familiarity and hunger. I reached for the overhead light, thinking maybe a little brightness would make the world inside the van feel less claustrophobic. But when I flicked the switch, nothing turned on. The LED didn't even flicker. I tried the cabin lights next. Dead. I tried the radio. Dead. Every electrical system in the van had died without explanation. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me then. Things break, sure, but they don't break simultaneously and silently. And they don't break right after something knows your name. I sat there trying to steady my breathing when I noticed something else. The air inside the van felt colder. Not by much, but enough that I saw my breath fog faintly in the beam of my small emergency flashlight. That beam barely cut through the air. The light felt thinner than usual, weaker, like the darkness was eating at its edges. I swept it around the van, checking the windows, the ceiling, the corners. Everything looked normal. But normal was the one thing that didn't fit anymore. A sudden vibration rattled through the van. Not a big one, more like the slightest tremor, enough to make a metal spoon on my counter roll half an inch. I snapped the flashlight toward the floor. The gravel outside was still. No footsteps, no animals, no wind. Another tremor. A little stronger this time. It came from beneath the van, traveling up through the metal frame like something was brushing against it or crawling under it. I held still, barely daring to breathe. Then the sound came, the faintest shift of gravel, like a weight dragging across it. Not a paw, not a hoof, something heavier, something deliberate. And then, too close, too real, a slow exhale from directly beneath the van. My stomach flipped. Instinct told me to run, but where? Into the dark desert that swallowed sound, toward the power posts that barely stood straight. There was no safety outside, no guarantee of distance. And if something had managed to get underneath my van without making a proper sound, it wasn't something I wanted to meet face to face. The van shifted again, a small jolt that made the cabinets creak. Something was testing the weight of my home on wheels, checking its shape the same way the taps had checked its skin. I scrambled for the front seats, shining the flashlight down toward the footwells. A shadow passed beneath the van. Not a clear shape, more like a distortion in the space where light should have reached. It moved smoothly, almost fluidly, dragging darkness with it. That's when I made the mistake of whispering to myself, "What do you want?" The flashlight dimmed by half instantly, like the darkness had inhaled at the sound of my voice. I shut up. Fear gagged me silent, and then, impossibly, the whisper answered. Not from outside, not from beneath, from inside the van. Here. I jerked around, swinging the flashlight into the cabin behind me, but the light sputtered in my hand, a weak pulse that barely lit my own fingers. The whisper came again, drifting like breath across the back of my neck. Here. Not a command, not a greeting. A location. A statement of presence. I pressed my back against the steering wheel, heart slamming in my chest, trying to force myself to think. I dealt with dangerous situations before. Not supernatural ones, but real physical threats. I knew panic could get you killed faster than any predator. I needed clarity. I needed an escape plan. There was a small emergency panel under my driver's seat with hand tools and a portable battery I used for jump-starting. If I could get to it and get the van running, I might have a chance. I lowered myself slowly, trying not to make noise, and reached under the seat. My fingers brushed the plastic case, almost there, and then something touched my wrist. Not grabbing, not clawing, just touching. Cold, too cold. Like the absence of heat, the way a shadow feels if you could hold it. I yanked my hand back with a strangled gasp, The flashlight flickered violently, then outright died, plunging the van into total, suffocating black. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't a word. It was a sound I can only describe as a shape, a long, curved breath that bent through the air like it was feeling the van from the inside out, searching for me, mapping me. I slid backward instinctively, pressing myself against the driver's door. The window was cool on my shoulder, too cool. Frost-like condensation spread across the glass in the outline of a long hand. A human hand, except longer. Too many joints, fingers tapering into something that wasn't quite finger-shaped. The imprint stretched, lingered, then dissolved like it had never been there. My whole body broke into a cold sweat. Every part of me wanted to scream, but the silence hanging over the desert felt like it would swallow the sound whole and give it back to me, twisted. So I forced myself to breathe, slowed, almost shallow. This thing, whatever it was, listened more than it moved. It reacted to voice, to vibration, to intention. I closed my eyes, not because I thought it would protect me, but because there was something in the darkness I didn't want to accidentally see. A low resonance filled the van. Not quite a hum, not quite breathing, but something in between. It vibrated through the metal, through my bones, through my teeth. Like the van was tuning itself to a frequency I wasn't supposed to hear. Then, all at once, the sound cut off. The silence returned. And for a brief moment, I thought maybe it was over, until I heard the engine turn over. My eyes flew open. The keys were still in the ignition, untouched. My hands were nowhere near the steering column. But the van's engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life, full throttle, the whole vehicle shaking violently around me. The headlights blasted on. The high beams pointed not at the empty desert, but directly at the bathhouse. A silhouette stood in the doorway. Tall, narrow, motionless. I couldn't make out a face, couldn't even make out clothing. Just a long, human outline standing in pitch black despite the high beams burning at full strength. The engine revved harder, like something else was pressing the gas pedal. My door locks clicked open, one by one. I reached for them instinctively, but they clicked locked again. Then opened, then locked. Faster. Faster, back and forth, like fingers were testing them. The silhouette in the bathhouse doorway didn't move. The van vibrated so hard I thought the windows would shatter. And then the whisper came again, not behind me, not beside me, not under me, but everywhere inside the van at once. Run. Not a warning, an invitation, a challenge, a command. My entire survival instinct ignited like gasoline. I grabbed the jumper battery with shaking hands, knowing I had only seconds. The silhouette took a single step forward. The silhouette's step was slow, like it was giving me time to watch it move, like it wanted me to witness its arrival. My grip tightened around the portable jumper battery until my knuckles went white. The engine roared even louder, shaking the mirrors, rattling the cabinets. The dash lights flickered, not randomly, but in a pulse. A rhythm, almost like breathing. The second the silhouette shifted its weight again, I bolted. I didn't wait to question it, didn't look for a better plan. Instinct took full control, the kind that bypasses logic and digs straight into your spine. I threw myself toward the sliding door, slammed my hand against the latch, and yanked it open. The night swallowed me. My boots hit the gravel and slid, nearly sending me to my knees. But I kept moving. The cold air tore at my lungs, each breath sharp enough to hurt. Behind me, the VW engine screamed as if something inside was forcing it past redline. The headlights washed across the gravel lot, bleaching everything in harsh, unnatural brightness. But the silhouette, it wasn't in the doorway anymore. I whipped around, scanning the open desert, the bathhouse, the picnic tables. Nothing. My breath fogged in the air, hanging there, twisting in a direction that didn't match the wind. Then I realized the silence had followed me outside. No insects, no wind, no hum of lights. Not even the crunch of my own steps sounded right. The gravel swallowed each footfall a second too late, like the sound had to crawl its way out of the ground. I ran anyway. The jumper battery slammed against my thigh as I sprinted across the lot toward the sagging power posts. My van's engine revved behind me, then choked. A metallic screech cut through the stillness as something dragged along the side of the vehicle. Long, slow, peeling. I didn't look back. I reached the nearest power post and dropped to my knees beside it, wheezing, trembling, fumbling with the jumper cables. My hands shook so badly I kept missing the clamps, scraping my knuckles against the metal. "Come on," I muttered under my breath, the words barely a whisper. Bad idea. The moment my voice broke the air, a cold ripple moved through the ground beneath me. Silence inhaled. The jumper cable slipped from my fingers as a pressure built in the air beside me, subtle at first, then growing. A distortion like heat waves bending light, except this was cold. Bitter cold, the kind that numbed bone. The flashlight in my pocket flickered on by itself. Its dim circle of light drifted upwards, slow and shaky, illuminating nothing at first, then catching on a shape behind the power post. A figure, not the silhouette from the bathhouse. Taller, closer. Its outline wavered like smoke trapped in glass. Every hair on my body stood up. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, falling hard enough that pain shot up my arm. I scrambled away, kicking gravel, trying to breathe through the crushing weight of the moment. The flashlight flickered again, then burst to full brightness, the beam slicing clean through the shape. And it wasn't there. It had never been there, or it had moved. A whisper brushed the back of my neck. "Here." I spun so fast I lost my footing again. My palms hit the gravel and scraped open. I tasted iron in my mouth. Blood or fear, I couldn't tell. The flashlight danced wildly across the lot, illuminating the VW's headlights still blasting into the night. Something stood in front of them now. Not a silhouette. A form. Its shape was wrong. Too narrow in the torso, too elongated in the limbs, bending forward as if listening to the sound of my breath tearing through the air. Its skin, if it was skin, shimmered in and out of existence, like it wasn't built for this world, like it borrowed its outline from something else. It took one slow step toward me. My survival instincts snapped. I lurched to my feet, ignoring the pain in my palms, and sprinted toward the van. If the thing wanted me out of it so badly, then being inside it again was exactly where I needed to be. The gravel swallowed my footsteps, but my heartbeat pounded loud enough to drown everything else. I lunged into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me. The locks clicked twice without me touching them. The headlights flickered, then stabilized. The engine remained dead, hissing like something was wrapped around the block, holding it in place. I jammed the jumper battery onto the ignition wires, hands shaking so hard I nearly dropped the entire unit. Sparks flew. The dash lights flickered. The radio glitched on, producing a warbled, drawn-out static that didn't sound electronic. It sounded vocal, like something trying to mimic a voice and failing. Through the windshield, the figure took another step toward the van, then another. The lights dimmed as it approached, the air inside the van tightening, pressurizing. The windows began to frost around the edges, spiderwebbing inward until only a small, clear circle remained in the center. Through that circle, I watched it come closer, not walking, but drifting, its feet barely disturbing the gravel. I slammed the jumper battery against the terminal again. The VW engine coughed. It sputtered. It roared to life so violently the entire van jumped. The headlights blasted back to full power, cutting through the creature's form, and for a moment, the light carved a hole straight through it, hollowing its center like a lantern shining through fog. The thing recoiled. The silence pulsed hard enough to pop in my ears, and that was all I needed. I rammed the van into gear. The clutch grabbed. The VW shot forward, tires spitting gravel in a wave behind me. The creature surged toward the vehicle, stretching, growing, its outline unraveling into tendrils of darkness that reached across the lot like fingers trying to hook the bumper. I kept accelerating. The tendrils scraped the back of the van, each contact exploding with a pressure that made my ears ring like the sound was being crushed before it could exist. The bathhouse shot past in my peripheral vision. The lot blurred behind me. The road into the desert opened up in front of me, empty and black. I didn't slow down. Didn't think. Didn't breathe. The van's engine screamed, shaking like something inside it was fighting against something outside it. The tendrils dragged across the asphalt now. No taps, no scratches, just a heavy, dragging resonance like metal being pulled through tar. I pressed harder. The VW bucked, lurched, then surged forward as though something holding it back had finally let go. The darkness behind me peeled away. I didn't look back. I focused on the thin thread of road illuminated by the high beams, letting the engine's roar drown out the memory of the whisper. But even as the speed increased, even as the headlights grabbed the desert highway and stretched it out in front of me, I felt the air in the cab shift. Warmer, less heavy, less suffocating. The silence let go. Sound returned, the hum of the tires, the rattle of the cabinets, the small creaks of the van settling at high speed, and my breath, ragged, uneven, but real. I kept driving. Miles of empty highway blurred under the wheels, the night sky turning from pitch to dark blue. My hand stayed locked on the wheel, knuckles white, palms slick with sweat and blood. The first hint of dawn crept over the horizon, a thin, pale line of light. I felt my pulse slow, my breath return, my mind start to catch up to what I'd escaped. But just as the sun broke over the distant mesas, warming the world into color, the radio crackled to life on its own. A whisper seeped through the speakers. Not here this time. Not around me, not under me. Just a breath, slow, familiar, followed by the same word that started it all. Evan. The silence wasn't gone, it was following. The whisper dissolved into static, but something colder than fear lingered in its place. The knowledge that whatever I'd escaped hadn't actually stayed behind. The desert blurred past my windows in a smear of pale morning light, but the feeling inside the van stayed wrong. Off balance. Weighted, like the air was listening. I turned the radio off. It clicked back on. I ripped the power knob out by hand, wires snapping with a sharp metallic bite. The static died instantly. The silence that followed was not the suffocating kind from the RV park, but it wasn't normal either. It felt crowded, like the space inside the van had grown too full, even though I was alone. I kept driving until the sun climbed high enough to wash the desert in gold, turning shadows into honest shapes again. Under the daylight, the world looked normal, comforting even. The stillness became peaceful instead of predatory. I cracked the window, letting warm air spill into the cabin, trying to convince myself that whatever I'd felt before had been some twisted combination of exhaustion and fear. But the name on the radio, my name, echoed in the back of my skull in a way no rational explanation could settle. I drove until I reached a barren pull-off overlooking a wide stretch of red rock and open sky. It wasn't a campground, wasn't even a proper turnout. Just enough space for me to get the van off the asphalt and let the shaking in my hands finally settle. I parked, turned off the engine, and waited for it to click as it cooled. Those familiar metallic pings were grounding, mechanical, predictable, real. The silence here wasn't like last night. It wasn't absolute. It wasn't hungry. It was just quiet, the way silence is supposed to be. And that's when my mind finally started to catch up. The whisper hadn't been outside the van. The breath hadn't fogged the windows from the desert air. The silhouette hadn't left tracks in the gravel. None of it behaved like something physical. None of it acted like something that lived out there. It had all behaved like something that lived in here, in the absence of sound, in the space between signals, in the dead air where fear makes echoes out of memory. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes, letting the image of the RV park settle where it didn't want to settle, the bathhouse door, the flickering lights, the way the silence moved like it had a body, the way it called my name like it had practiced. And then, as the sun warmed my face through the windshield, something inside me shifted. Not fear this time, but recognition. I'd been running from silence long before last night. After my brother died, quiet places didn't feel peaceful anymore. They felt accusatory, like they expected something of me, like they wanted answers I didn't have. I started filling every moment with sound, music, podcasts, engine noise, wind, anything to drown out the places where memory clawed its way back in. Silence became something I avoided, something that hunted me because I never let it land. And in that Arizona RV park where sound vanished completely, my mind had no shield left. Every fear I had tried to bury found room to move. The shape of grief, the voice of it, the presence of it, maybe it had all taken form because I refused to give it any. I didn't know if that made last night psychological or supernatural, but either way, it was real. The fear had been real. The threat had been real. And the lesson it carried wasn't done with me yet. I opened the sliding door and stepped into the warmth of the desert morning. The gravel felt solid under my boots, honest. The wind brushed against my skin, gentle, natural, without the heavy pressure of something lurking in its folds. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe all the way down. As I stood there, looking out over the open land, the world finally felt wide again instead of closing in around me. But in that widening space came a thought I didn't expect. Silence isn't the enemy. Silence is the place where the truth eventually shows up. I sat on the van's bumper, elbows on my knees, and let myself feel the weight in my chest I'd been refusing to name ever since my brother passed. The guilt, the anger, the way losing him had carved something out of me I never filled back in, the way I'd run from anything quiet because I was afraid of what that quiet exposed. And that's when I heard the sound, a single breath, not behind me, not inside me, but to my left, coming from the open desert. It wasn't cold, it wasn't distorted, it wasn't hunting, it was familiar, human. I turned my head slowly. For a moment, just a moment, I saw someone standing in the sunlight at the edge of the pull-off. Broad shoulders, hands in jacket pockets, the posture I'd memorize anywhere, my brother. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't smile. He simply stood there, framed by a world I'd been too scared to face without running. I blinked. He was gone. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of dust and sun-warmed rock. No cold, no wrongness, just the natural emptiness of the desert stretching out around me. But the fear that had chased me into the night eased its grip, unraveling in a long, quiet thread. Because it wasn't trying to destroy me. It was trying to force me to stop running. I stood there a long time, letting the sunlight fill the spaces last night's silence carved out, letting breath come back in steady instead of stolen. The VW behind me ticked and cooled, its engine settling like it was finally allowed to rest. Eventually, I climbed back inside. The seats felt softer. The air inside the cabin no longer felt too full. The windows were warm to the touch instead of cold. I turned the key in the ignition, half expecting something unnatural to seize it again. The engine started clean. No strain, no whisper, no flicker of lights, just the steady rumble of a machine ready to move on. I eased back onto the highway, letting the road stretch open in front of me. The desert rolled by, alive with sound. Birds calling, wind pressing against the van, tires hissing along the asphalt. All the things that told me I wasn't trapped in the absence anymore. A few miles down, a scenic turnout appeared, overlooking a wide basin of rust-colored mesas. Normally, I would have passed it without thinking. But something in me, the same part that made me sit with the silence this morning instead of running, told me to pull over. I parked facing the open land, killed the engine, and let the silence rise around me again. Not the predatory silence, the honest kind. I let it fill the van without fear this time, let it settle into every corner without trying to drown it out. For the first time in a long time, I didn't try to escape myself inside of it. And for the first time, the silence didn't take shape, didn't flicker, didn't whisper. It simply existed, and so did I. But when I opened the glove box to grab my notepad, something slid forward, something I hadn't seen before. A small strip of paper, old, wrinkled, typewritten. 3 words, "You stopped running." My hands went still. The wind pushed gently against the side of the van, the sunlight warming my face, the world breathing in a way that felt whole again. I didn't know whether the message was a warning, a gift, a hallucination born of fear, or something left behind by the thing I'd escaped. But I knew one truth as I folded the note and tucked it into my pocket. Running had almost destroyed me. Silence had almost swallowed me, but facing it, finally facing it, had given me back the one thing I didn't know I'd lost: myself. And as I pulled onto the road again, the VW humming steady beneath me, the desert stretching open like a promise, I understood the final lesson that strange, impossible night had carved into me. You don't survive unexplained phenomena by escaping what hunts you. You survive by confronting what haunts you. And sometimes the thing that haunts you isn't out there in the dark. Sometimes it's the silence you carry everywhere you go. I used to believe that the thrill of RV camping came from the open road, from the freedom to go anywhere and sleep beneath any sky. But the truth is, the freedom isn't what scares you. It's what's already waiting there, long before your tires ever touch the ground. My name is Eric Walsh. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Flagstaff, Arizona, where forests swallow entire neighborhoods and the mountains make you feel small no matter how grown you think you are. I've spent most of my adult life chasing campgrounds across the Southwest in my blue Volkswagen van, a 1988 Westphalia that rattles with every mile but somehow keeps moving forward. I film my road trips, share advice online, and tell people that the scariest moment in camping is that first night alone. That was before this happened. In early autumn, I drove into New Mexico searching for cooler air, fewer tourists, and a quiet place to reset my head. I'd been struggling with sleepless nights, my fault, mostly, forcing myself to stay awake, editing videos, convinced that if I slowed down, my channel would vanish into the abyss of forgotten content. So I left, thinking distance could silence the noise. I ended up near a place the locals call Hollow Creek Basin. It's not on the usual camping apps. It barely even exists on maps. Just a patch of Bureau of Land Management land that someone once marked with a dot. But when I asked around about it at a gas station, the cashier told me it was a favorite for hunters and travelers who wanted quiet. Wide, flat space, old junipers, easy to get in and out. Perfect, right? The sun was lowering behind dusty hills as I turned my van down an unmarked dirt road. Each bump beneath my tires made the gear inside clatter. The clouds were glowing like embers, and all I could think about was how peaceful tonight would feel. A night where I didn't have to hear the constant ping of notifications or the pressure of delivering something exciting. From the moment I stepped out of my van, everything smelled like cold stone and dry sagebrush. Sharp, clean, lonely. I found a clear spot near a line of crooked fence posts, old wooden stakes leaning and splintered like they'd been planted by someone who no longer remembered why they bothered. I thought they marked old property lines. I thought they were nothing. I set up camp, cooked a simple dinner, and sat outside with the doors of the VW swung open, letting the twilight drift in. There wasn't another soul around, not even distant headlights, just a light wind sighing across the desert. That's when I noticed the ground. Not the entire ground, just a circle maybe 20 feet across, darker than everything around it. Like the earth had been burned long ago but never healed. The soil looked sunken, cracked. Nothing grew there, no weeds, no brush. It was as if nature simply refused. I stared at it for a moment, curiosity tugging at me. Then a colder thought crept in. That spot had been disturbed, dug up, then filled in. Many times. My brain immediately tried to rationalize maybe old trash pits, maybe a fire ring from large gatherings. But no fire leaves a perfect circle like that. No digging stays so neat for so long. I looked away, forced myself to look away. Bad things only become real when you let your curiosity poke at them. Night crawled in fast. With it came a quiet that didn't feel peaceful anymore, more like a silence that waited for something. I left my headlights on while I brushed my teeth outside, like an idiot who thinks light makes him safe. Every time I turned my back to that dark patch of soil, a prickle climbed my spine, warning me not to forget it was there. Inside the van, I lay on the folding bed, listening to the desert. The wind rustled, then faded. Coyotes howled far off, then quieted. The air grew still, too still. It reminded me of a held breath. When the first sound came, I thought it was my imagination, a soft thump. Then another. I held still, ears straining. It sounded like something pressing against the underside of the van. Not scratching, not brushing, pushing. I shifted my weight and the van creaked. Silence returned. Maybe the metal was cooling. Maybe the wind had changed direction. I told myself anything that would slow my racing heart. But as I reached over to turn off the cabin light, I noticed something out the window. The ground outside seemed to shift. I sat up, squinting. Moonlight washed over the land in pale whites and silvers, and for a moment everything looked normal. The circle of wasted earth remained still and dead. Then something inside it pulsed. I jerked backward, breath trapped in my throat. The soil wasn't moving. Something beneath the soil was. The wind picked up again, gently tapping the canvas roof. My mind swarmed with explanations I didn't believe. Burrowing animals, underground water, my tired eyes playing tricks. But deep down, a voice whispered the truth I didn't want to hear. I had parked on top of something that was never meant to be uncovered. I reached for my flashlight and shined it through the window. The beam hit the circle. Nothing. Just dirt. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew heavier, like the night pressed against the glass. My heart thudded so hard it filled my ears. I turned away from the window and tried to lie down again. Just sleep, I told myself. Exhaustion makes shadows into monsters. If I could just sleep, the morning sun would burn all this fear away, but sleep never came because the thumping returned, harder, sharper. Directly under me. I froze. Every breath felt too loud. It wasn't random movement now, it was rhythmic. Thump, 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 as if someone or something was knocking from beneath the ground. A voice inside me said, run, leave everything, drive, never come back. But another voice, the stubborn one, told me that fear is just a trick of the dark, that I was overreacting to loose earth and shifting metal, that I couldn't abandon camp because of phantom knocks, that people would laugh if they heard this story. And the worst truth, I didn't want to be the kind of man who ran away from the unknown. Not again. Not after the ways fear had already ruled parts of my life. So I lay there, paralyzed between panic and pride. Minutes stretched like hours. The knocks slowed, then stopped. Only silence remained. Eventually, fatigue dragged me under into an unsteady sleep. When sunlight finally woke me, I sucked in air like a drowning man. I scrambled out of the van so fast I nearly scraped my head on the door frame. The soil circle looked unchanged. No signs of footprints. No holes. Nothing. As if the night had lied. But my van's rear tires, they had sunk deeper. A couple inches, maybe. Like the earth had softened beneath them. Unease lingered, sticky and unwelcome. But the warmth of the morning gave me courage. Embarrassment, too. If knocks in the dark could shake me this badly, what kind of storyteller was I? What kind of outdoorsman? I made coffee, ate breakfast as if nothing had happened, and convinced myself I'd stay one more night just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. It was only noon when I made my biggest mistake. I walked into that circle. The air felt colder there. The ground squished slightly, though no mud existed. I crouched down to touch the soil. It was loose. Dry, almost like ash. My fingers brushed something hard beneath the surface. I pulled back, startled. My stomach clenched, but curiosity, damn curiosity, pulled me right back in. I dug my fingers in again, scraping gently. I uncovered the edge of a stone, smooth, shaped, not natural. Then the wind shifted and a smell rose up from the ground. Old rot, damp cloth, and something sour, like a room where someone has been crying for too long. I stumbled backward, nearly falling, because that wasn't a buried stone. It was the corner of a grave marker. And I realized then, with a nausea so deep it twisted my ribs, this wasn't a campsite. This was a burial ground. And I had slept right on top of the dead. Panic poured through me like ice water. I stumbled away from that circle, brushing dirt from my hands as if the earth itself could cling to my skin and pull me under. My instinct screamed at me to run, to get in the van and never look back. But fear has a strange way of trapping you in place. I stood there staring at that half-buried grave marker, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. There were no names on the exposed stone. No dates, just a rough edge, worn by time. It didn't look recent. It looked forgotten. abandoned, like whoever had been placed beneath it had been left there long before anyone knew this land existed. My thoughts turned to the fence posts. Those crooked stakes, were they boundary markers? Had someone tried to warn people not to cross them? Or had they been placed to hold something inside? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. Logic told me to pack up and leave that instant. But pride and stubborn denial whispered that I was being irrational. People bury animals out here sometimes, right? Maybe someone laid their dog to rest. Maybe I just found a memorial someone left behind. Maybe the thumping in the night had come from a restless imagination that had been awake too many nights in a row. I kept telling myself those excuses, but they didn't erase the heaviness pressing against my spine. By late afternoon, I was sitting in my van editing footage from earlier trips, anything to distract myself. The desert heat shimmered outside, twisting the horizon into a wavering mirage. Yet the silence felt wrong again. Not still, but listening. I tried turning up music, but every note seemed swallowed by the air. When the sun started dipping, anxiety crept back through me like returning plague. I made a decision. Tonight, I wasn't going to bed early. I wasn't going to lie there and wait for the knocks to come. I'd stay awake with every light I owned, camera running, listening, watching, proving to myself that nothing was wrong. The sun collapsed into the earth. Shadows stretched long and sharp. That circle in the dirt disappeared into the dark, becoming a black stain I tried not to look at. The wind died completely. Even the coyotes, loud the night before, stayed silent. I set my flashlight upright on the counter, aimed at the windows. I powered up my camera and pointed it toward the circle through a crack in the curtains. My van was glowing like a lantern in the empty desert. Then I waited. Minutes crawled by like they had weight. My breathing sounded too loud. Sweat dampened my neck, though the air had turned cold. I kept glancing at the clock on my phone. Time felt slower than it should. Nothing happened, and that should have been comforting. Instead, it made me feel like something was waiting for the perfect moment, like fear itself was stalking me, waiting for me to blink. Finally, a faint sensation tickled the soles of my feet. A vibration. I froze. Another. But softer this time, as if something was testing the wood panel, learning where the weak spots were. Then came the smell. First so faint I thought it a memory. Damp cloth, stale breath, old sorrow. Then stronger, seeping through cracks I couldn't see. My chest tightened as dread slithered up my throat. No sound. No movement. Just the awful realization that something beneath me was rising again. I leaned toward the camera screen, hands shaking, and zoomed in on the patch of dark earth outside. At first, nothing. Then a mound rose slightly, settled, then rose again like the breathing of someone trapped underground. No, I whispered. No, but the word held no power here. The vibration returned, harder this time. Thump. Thump, like fists slamming against a coffin lid. The van rocked slightly. I scrambled for the keys, heart galloping, lungs burning. The engine needed to start. I needed to get off that spot, but my fingers fumbled, slick with panic. I dropped the keys on the floor and nearly dove after them. Thump, thump, thump. The whole frame of the van shuddered now, as if the earth beneath me was swelling, something forcing its way up. I finally found the keys, jammed them into the ignition, and twisted. The engine coughed, sputtered, then died. No, 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 come on. I tried again, pumping the gas. My breath came in short stabs of air. The van shuddered again. Something groaned under the ground, deep, hollow, ancient. The engine caught on the third try, roaring alive like a lifeline. I slammed it into gear and hit the accelerator. The van lurched, but the wheels spun uselessly, caught in sand that hadn't been soft before. The earth was swallowing the tires. I screamed. A sound I didn't recognize as mine. The pumping under the van turned into a scraping, like fingernails dragging through dirt. Then I felt it. Something pressed upward into the mattress beneath me through the thin floor. Slow, deliberate, testing the barrier between us. I stomped the gas pedal again. The engine whined. The van rocked, and then release. The ground seemed to exhale, and the rear end of the van jerked free. I shot forward without thinking, tires spitting dirt and gravel. I didn't even steer, I just fled. The headlights revealed the landscape in frantic flashes, dead land, fence posts whipping past, sagebrush bending like frightened animals. I didn't stop, not for a mile, not for two. My vision blurred with terror and adrenaline. Finally, the road leveled out. I pulled to the side of a smoother dirt path and cut the engine. The sudden quiet stabbed my ears. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely keep hold of the steering wheel. Every sound, the ticking of the engine cooling, the sigh of the wind returning, my own pulse, felt like a threat. I turned off all the lights and curled into the driver's seat, shaking, listening. The night outside still smelled wrong, like the burial ground clung to me, hitching a ride. I told myself I'd leave first thing in the morning. I told myself I'd never return. I told myself that I had escaped. But fear doesn't vanish just because you drive away from where it started. Sleep evaded me until exhaustion crashed through every thought. Hours blurred and my eyes drooped, surrendering to a restless half-sleep. When morning came, I stepped outside to examine the van, expecting deep tire marks or broken ground. But the dirt beneath the wheels looked ordinary, hard-packed, undisturbed, as if the earth had healed overnight, as if it didn't want anyone to know. I paced around, searching for scratches or dents from whatever had slammed against the undercarriage. Nothing. The van looked perfectly fine. My camera. Maybe the footage would prove it wasn't all in my head. I opened the passenger door, grabbed the camera from the front seat where I had tossed it during the panic, and scrolled through the files. My stomach dropped. The recording had stopped right before the first thump. Corrupt file, unplayable. A single frame frozen, the circle of ground perfectly still. I closed my eyes and felt the truth settle like a stone at the bottom of a deep well. Something there had been watching me, and it had been angry that I woke it. I thought leaving would erase the fear. I thought distance would protect me. But the desert doesn't forgive the curious, and it doesn't forget the ones who disrespect the dead. That night, I tried to sleep in a proper campground outside Santa Rosa, surrounded by other RVs, warm fires, laughter, safety, at least in appearance. But even with people close by, the dread followed me like a shadow stitched to my heels. When darkness swallowed the campground, the wind rose again. The smell returned, damp cloth, old sorrow. Then came a faint knock against the floor beneath my bed. One. Then a second, slow, patient. Whatever I had disturbed, it wasn't finished with me. And I realized with a sickening clarity, I hadn't escaped anything. I had brought it with me. I sat upright in the darkness, holding my breath like a child trying to hide from a nightmare. But nightmares live in the mind. This sound lived in the walls of my van. Thump, a pause. Thump, quiet, but precise. There was intent in it, a message carved in rhythm. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself that a branch had fallen under the van, that maybe the wind had rolled a rock against the undercarriage, that maybe fear had rewired my perception so badly that I was now interpreting every noise through panic. But the sequence came again. 3 taps. Then silence. 3 taps again, a little harder. Someone or something was knocking. Not from outside, from underneath. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I could feel my heart beating so violently it hurt. I tried gripping the countertop for stability, and that was when I heard the softest shift of metal, like weight settling, directly beneath me. I snapped. Survival overruled pride, fear, logic, all of it. I launched myself toward the driver's seat like I'd been shoved. Keys, ignition, engine, everything became a blur of desperation. The van roared to life. I slammed it into gear and tore away from that campground without glancing at who I was waking, who I might run off the road, who might wonder why I was fleeing as if chased by death itself. Gravel spit behind me. The whole van rattled like it might tear apart. I didn't care. I drove until the adrenaline started fading, until the stars looked like smears in my vision and the highway lights shimmered like underwater lanterns. I should have pulled into the nearest town, found a motel, called a friend, anything resembling sane behavior. But sanity had become a luxury I no longer trusted. I parked behind a truck stop next to big rigs, surrounded by heavy engines and human presence. Somewhere public enough to feel grounded, yet still alone. The entire night I stayed awake with every light on, staring at the floor, waiting. No knocks came. No scraping. Just the distant sound of diesel engines idling like armored guardians. That should have eased me. It didn't. Because dread wasn't about what I heard anymore. It was about what I knew. I had disturbed a burial ground, not a marked cemetery with records and names, not a memorial anyone cared for. I had camped on forgotten graves, and something buried there had woken to the pressure of my tires, my footsteps, my touch. By sunrise, exhaustion had hollowed me out. I found myself driving again, robotically, without purpose. Desert, highway, small towns passing like mirages. I tried calling a friend, thinking that saying something out loud might anchor me. But what was I supposed to say? Hey, man, I think the dead are crawling up through the ground to get me? They'd laugh. Or worse, they'd worry. By mid-afternoon, the highway led me into plains that seemed empty enough to swallow me whole. And that's when I saw the sign, Indian Reservation. Respect sacred grounds. The desert wind kicked up dust. The sun burned white and merciless above the horizon, for my breath caught in my throat. Sacred grounds. My stomach twisted as everything clicked into place with brutal clarity. The grave marker, the fence posts, the circle of barren soil, the way the air had felt colder there, heavier, as if every footstep was trespass. I wasn't just camping in the wrong spot. I was an intruder on someone's forgotten burial field, and the people buried there weren't at rest. The guilt hit me harder than fear for the first time. How many times had I camped without thinking about who had lived here before I existed? How many places did I treat like backdrops for my stories without considering what ground I was laying my head upon? A memory flashed of the smell that rose when I touched the dirt. Not rot, not decay, grief, like someone mourning their own abandonment. I pulled over, parked on the shoulder, and stepped out into the hot wind. My legs trembled. My hands shook. The smell was gone. The knocking was gone, but I felt watched again, not by a predator, but by eyes in the soil, asking why. The earth doesn't forget it's dead. People do. I stared down at the dust covering my van tires and whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." The wind answered by lifting a swirl of sand into the air, spinning it like a tiny storm. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and I stepped back quick, every nerve screaming caution. But I held my ground. "I will leave you alone," I said. "I won't go back there." A long silence followed, stretching so far I started to feel foolish for speaking at all. Then, almost imperceptibly, that heaviness in the air lifted. The wind softened. The world exhaled, and for a moment I believed it was over. I drove until nightfall, found a commercial campground filled with RVs, neon-lit office cabin, pets barking at squirrels, normalcy, civilization. I finally felt myself breathe again. I sat outside with coffee under a string of lights hung between palm trees someone thought would make the place feel tropical. Laughter drifted from a nearby campsite. Someone grilled burgers. Life felt harmless for the first time in days. I convinced myself I was safe now, that whatever had stirred beneath that desert was appeased by my apology, that I had left the danger behind. Later, I climbed back into the van, feeling more calm than I had any right to. I stretched out, eyes heavy, and for the first time since Hollow Creek Basin, sleep seemed possible. I closed my eyes, and the floor beneath me breathed, a long, slow push upward, as if a chest below the floorboards had expanded, inhaling. Every muscle in my body turned to stone. The smell returned, stronger this time, wet earth, damp cloth, loneliness so old it hurt to breathe it in. No knock, no scrape, just the soft press of something reaching upward, like hands gently testing the barrier between death and the living. My eyes stayed shut. I didn't dare look. Then, in the faintest vibration against the wood beneath me, I felt a pattern. Not random, not aimless, a rhythm. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. The same message from the desert repeated. It hadn't stayed behind, it had chosen me. And now, deep inside every terrified heartbeat, a truth carved itself. You don't escape places like that. You carry them. I rolled slowly onto my side, not daring to shift my weight too fast. A tear slipped down the side of my face, not from fear alone, but from the crushing realization that this wasn't random, that I was being followed, punished. I whispered again, voice cracking, "I'm sorry." The vibration stopped instantly. Silence flooded the van again, but it felt like the silence of someone who had paused to listen. Only then did I open my eyes, and I saw through the thin gap beneath the cabinet a fingertip, gray, soil-coated, pressing upward from the darkness below. It held there just long enough for me to understand. The dead remember who stepped on them, and they don't forgive. I didn't scream. That surprised me. Terror hollowed me so completely that no sound could climb out. The fingertip didn't move, didn't claw or scratch. It just pressed there, patient, persistent, like a reminder there was no boundary between us anymore. Then slowly, it withdrew. The floor was still again. But I knew that wasn't the end of it, not even close. I hardly slept. Every moment was a fight against the panic that threatened to rip me apart. By dawn, I was shaking, feverish, and running on nothing but instinct. I started the van and drove without brushing my teeth, without coffee, barely registering the road signs or the miles passing under me. I knew where I had to go. I needed answers, context, history. I needed to understand what I had violated, so I rerouted toward a nearby reservation cultural center, small, simple, built from sun-worn brick. Inside, a few displays traced tribal lineage, sacred land, and burial practices. A quiet elder was sweeping the floor. I didn't have a clue how to explain what happened, so I just asked the simplest question I could manage. "Do you know anything about Hollow Creek Basin?" His broom stopped mid-sweep. He looked up at me with eyes like stones, dark, steady, old with grief that didn't come from one lifetime, but many. He stared for a long moment before asking, "What did you do there?" My chest tightened. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say I just drove past it, but something in his gaze stripped every excuse from my throat. "I camped there," I forced out. "I touched the ground." His lips thinned. "No one touches that ground, not anymore." I tried to sound rational. I didn't know it was sacred. I didn't know anyone was buried there. He set down the broom with shaking hands. "It is a forgotten place," he said quietly. "Not by us, by time, by the people who dug it up. They came looking for bones, for artifacts. They thought our dead belonged to museums." His jaw locked. "They disturbed what should never have been disturbed." My pulse pounded. "I think they're still disturbed." He studied me again, my shaking hands, my hollow eyes, and nodded as if confirming his worst suspicion. "You felt them." Not a question. A statement. I swallowed. "They followed me." His shoulders sagged, like part of him had expected this fate to fall on someone eventually. "When the ground is violated," he said, "the spirits beneath it rise to hold on to anything that still remembers them. They are not angry at your touch, traveler. They are angry at being forgotten. You stepped onto a place where grief has no tomb. You woke it. It thinks you can lead it home." Every word carved itself into me like a cold blade. "Is there a way to stop it?" He hesitated, as if he didn't want to give me false hope. "There is only one way," he said. "You must go back. You must return to where the bones were disturbed. You must speak to them. Promise them remembrance. Promise them respect. Only when they know they are not alone in the dark will they let go. Go back. Return." Everything inside me recoiled. "I barely escaped," I whispered. "You didn't escape," he corrected softly. "You postponed." I closed my eyes, tears stinging. The thought of returning to that dead earth, to the pulsing soil, to whatever waited beneath, felt like throwing myself into my own grave. But the elder wasn't finished. "You must go tonight," he said. "Spirits walk strongest in the dark. They must hear your apology under the same sky that heard your trespass." A shudder rolled through me. "If I don't go," he didn't let me finish. His silence was the answer. The dead would never stop. He placed a small bundle of dried sage and braided grass in my hands. "Light this when you stand upon the boundary of their resting place. Do not step into the circle again. Do not kneel. Do not turn your back until you are finished, and speak only truth." My hands curled around the bundle like it was the last lifeline I'd ever be offered. Before I left, he paused and said something that would haunt me deeper than any knock under the floor. They do not just want peace, they want witness. I drove back toward Hollow Creek Basin with dread breathing against the back of my neck the entire way. Every mile closer, the air felt heavier. The sunlight dimmed unnaturally, like the land itself was closing a curtain. When I turned down the dirt road again, my stomach twisted so sharply I nearly pulled over to vomit. But I kept driving. The fence posts appeared, bent ribs of a beast guarding its heart. And there it was. The circle of barren ground. Exactly as I'd left it, yet somehow darker, wider, like it had grown hungrier. I parked the van a safe distance away and stepped out, legs trembling violently. The wind was still. The silence felt like judgment. I lit the sage bundle. Smoke curled upward, carrying the sharp, earthy smell into the stillness. I stepped toward the fence line, each footfall a confrontation with my fear. When I reached the invisible boundary, the moment the air chilled and the soil turned hostile, I stopped. My heart hammered so hard I thought my ribs would splinter. I raised the burning sage. The smoke drifted toward the circle and then bent downward, sucked into the earth as if inhaled by a mouth beneath the ground. A low vibration rolled beneath my feet. I forced myself not to step back. "I came here to say I'm sorry," I began. "I didn't know this place was sacred. I didn't know you were here. But that ignorance is no excuse. You were meant to rest. I disturbed that. I disrespected that." The ground pulsed once, sharp like a jolt of anger. I kept my voice steady. "You are not forgotten. Not now. I will remember this place. I will speak of you. I will carry your story so the world knows what was done to you. You deserve dignity. You deserve peace." The smoke spiraled faster, dragged downward. "I will protect this ground from anyone who would harm it. I swear it. I will not let you disappear into the dark again." The earth trembled harder, deep rumbles that shook my bones. The circle looked like it was sinking, collapsing inward like a lung exhaling centuries of trapped air. I swallowed hard. "You don't need to follow me anymore. I know you only want to be known. I know you only want to be seen. Please." My voice cracked. "You are seen." Silence. Then, softly, something rose from the center of the circle, a faint shape, a shimmer of dust, a suggestion of human form, rising like a shadow without light. It drifted upward, face indistinct, hands laying at its sides, not reaching, not climbing, just existing. The air pressed into my ears. A whisper, thin as smoke. Home. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I bowed my head, not kneeling, not turning away, just offering respect from the only posture left to me. The shape dissolved into a cloud of dust, scattering like breath into the wind. The ground settled. The vibrations stopped. The smell vanished. And for the first time since that night, the air felt empty again. Completely, beautifully empty. I exhaled shakily, a sob catching in my throat, not from fear, but from a sorrow that wasn't entirely mine. I backed away slowly, never turning my back until I reached the van. My hands fumbled with the door, and when I finally climbed inside, my legs nearly gave out. The engine started on the first try. As I drove away, the breeze returned, rustling the sagebrush, like a thank you, whispered through leaves. But even as relief washed through me, something deeper stirred, an understanding that would follow me far longer than fear had. Some places in America are not just land. They are memory made physical. They are the unburied weight of history. They do not haunt us to terrify us. They haunt us so we remember. I didn't speed away afterward. I just drove slowly, windows cracked, letting the wind sweep away the last remnants of that place from my clothes, my lungs, my mind. But the silence inside me wasn't fear anymore. It was reverence, a weight replaced by a responsibility. Hours later, I found myself back on a main road, sunlight cutting through the windshield as if the world had been washed clean. My chest ached from the tension finally releasing. My heart slowed into a rhythm that didn't feel like panic, just existence. I pulled over at a rest stop overlooking a canyon. Nothing spooky, nothing legendary, just rock and sky stretching out forever. For the first time in days, I stepped outside without that instinctive flinch, without checking the ground beneath my feet for signs of shifting earth. I placed my palm over the sun-warmed stone barrier, grounding myself in a world that felt real again. The sage bundle's leftover scent clung to my fingers. Strange how something as small as dried leaves could hold such power. Power not from magic, but from acknowledgement, from respect. I thought about what the elder told me. Not angry at my touch, angry at being forgotten. The phrase kept echoing in my head, reshaping everything I thought I knew about camping in these wild places. I always claimed to love the land. I told my viewers that nature frees you, empowers you, heals you, but I never asked what nature remembered, who it remembered, how much pain lay beneath our wheels. Back in the van, I looked at my camera, the device I once believed was my shield, my storyteller, my purpose. I thought about the footage that corrupted right when the truth tried to show itself. Some things aren't meant to be content. Some stories don't want to be captured. They want to be honored. That night, I stayed at a small family-run RV park on the outskirts of Albuquerque. Faded picnic tables, buzzing fluorescent sign. It was comforting in the way only a place built by human hands could be. I made myself a cup of coffee, sitting under a rusty shade awning, listening to the highway hum in the distance. Then I noticed something on my van door. It was a single mark in the dust, like a vertical finger swipe from someone reaching out. Not threatening, not aggressive, just there, a final reminder, a goodbye. I stared at it for a long moment. I didn't wipe it away. Some marks should be carried. That night, I slept with my hand resting on the floor. No fear, no dread, just a quiet pulse in the wood, a heartbeat that wasn't mine, but wasn't hostile either. It was presence, witness, memory. And when I woke in the morning, the floor was perfectly still. I drove north, back toward Arizona, back toward home. But everything looked sharper now. Every stretch of desert felt alive in a way I had ignored before. Every roadside hill felt like a monument. Every dust-covered trail felt guarded. I started noticing things I had overlooked my whole life, like old roadside markers without plaques, stones arranged carefully beside forgotten dirt roads, small clearings where grass refused to grow, places that were once filled with lives but had been reduced to anonymous soil. People say the American wilderness is empty. They have no idea how crowded it truly is. A week later, I returned to my apartment in Flagstaff. I parked the van in its usual spot, listening to the engine tick cool. My neighbors were out walking dogs, carrying groceries, living lives without burdens from beneath the earth. I envied them a little, but I also felt something they didn't: awareness. Inside, I sat down with my laptop and camera, my tools of storytelling, and opened a blank document. I stared at it knowing what I had to write, but also knowing I couldn't exploit what happened. This wasn't about thrills or clicks or fear for entertainment. This was a reminder, a responsibility. I titled the page, RV Camping. What happens when you disturb forgotten burial grounds? My fingers hovered above the keys. For once, I wasn't trying to create suspense or dramatic twists. I wasn't trying to impress anyone or chase views. I just wanted to share the truth. We aren't the first to fall asleep under these stars. We aren't the only ones who ever loved this land, and some memories lie buried so deep, they have learned to breathe through the earth. Typing the first words, my hands finally steadied. The fear I'd carried had transformed into purpose, into a warning for anyone who rolls their wheels across soil they believe belongs only to them. A warning that says, even the quietest ground remembers footsteps. Even the forgotten deserve honor. In the days that followed, I contacted preservation groups and shared the approximate location of Hollow Creek Basin, not to expose it to thrill seekers, but to protect it from ignorance like mine. They thanked me. They promised to take steps, and I believed them. The nights grew easier. No knocks, no breath rising from below. The floor beneath me was simply wood again. But sometimes, just before I drift into sleep, I feel a gentle warmth under my palm. A presence not asking for anything more than what I already gave. Witness, acknowledgement, remembrance. Wherever I go now, whether in the forests of Oregon or the red canyons of Utah, I pause before I park. I step out and listen. I look for signs, stones shaped by human hands, ground that feels too still, air that feels too heavy. And when I sense history beneath my feet, I give a nod, a greeting. I say quietly, I see you, not for fear of what might rise, but for respect toward what should never have been buried in silence. Because the land we travel through is not a blank canvas. It is a story still being told. And if we do not honor the chapters written before us, they will find a way to make us read them. Out there, in the wild edges of this country, where campfire smoke curls into dark skies and our headlights slice open ancient trails, there are places that demand reverence, places that breathe, places that remember. I didn't learn that from a travel guide. I learned it from the dead, and I will never forget them again.